Riverside seats do an ethnic cleansing.
Good evening to everyone. Salute to everyone tonight, and welcome to another edition of the Stand on Business podcast. I am your host, Boss Man. Hey, and I want to do a mic check, and I believe everyone can hear me because I can hear thyself. So I think we're good for the first time in a long time. All right, so I think we are all right. So how's everyone doing tonight? Just give me a second. I think I'm frozen. Technical difficulties in one way. So we're good in one way. Mic check is good, but we're doing a technical difficulty already starting out. Give me 1 second. One moment. Come on. There we go. All right, we're back. There we go. But I can definitely hear myself, so this is a good sign. All right, there we go. Everything froze on my side, but I can hear myself, and I'm sure everyone can hear me. So, all right. If it isn't one thing, it's another all the time. All right, but I'm pretty sure that everyone can hear me. So just do a quick check. Mic check. If everyone can hear me, please put a 1 in the chat. But I do believe I can be heard because I can hear myself through the other side. Hey. Salute to you. Okay. Hey, this is the first time I'm seeing you. So welcome in. Welcome into the foxhole, sir. All right. It's good to see you. All right. And I believe I saw Mr. Bennett. All right. Salute to you as well. All right. After that freeze, things are working kind of well. So earlier, I was clicking around and things were kind of sluggish. So I just did a quick reset here just a moment ago and seems to be working better now. So seems like I can be heard and things are well. So we're going to try again. Welcome to another edition of the Stand on Business podcast. I am your host, Boss Man. All right. And we seem to be working pretty well. All right. I thought we were going to get through this without any glitch starting out, but it seems like no matter what I do, we're going to have some sort of a glitch. Okay. Doesn't matter. All right. Whether it's the mic or whether it is the interface, it does not matter. Okay. Heck, I even switched connections just to make sure there wasn't any glitches, and it does not matter. I am going to have a problem. Okay. So first things first, I want to make sure that we understand something here. Support the fam. Okay. All right, you can support the fam directly to the BMU, a Black Men Unfiltered Network, by directly to a super chat. I'm sorry, Cash App here, or you can do it through a super chat tonight. So if you send a super chat, I will read it, and I will play something. All right, to ensure that your super chat is most definitely recognized. All right, but if you feel so inclined as well, you can support me directly as well through a Cash App. But also, I would personally love it if you go over to my channel, over to my YouTube channel, and just go over, hit like and subscribe, and come on back over here, okay? And grab yourself something cold to drink. All right. Shout out to Lost Translation. All right. But greatly appreciate it if you would support the fam and send a cash app to the Black Men and Filter Network, or a super chat directly through here. Okay. All right. Much appreciated. All right. All your support is wonderfully appreciated. All right. So tonight's going to be, I wouldn't say another doozy, but I want to button up tonight with my process of going through the history of the religion itself. Okay. I want to kind of finish that up before I get into more of the reason why religiosity is a conundrum. All right. The first part of, I guess, the first phase of this entire thing is kind of going over the first part of the conundrum, which is the component of religion itself. Okay. And then the second part of it is kind of going over historically how religion has been problematic within society when it has been used as a weapon, as a tool within society, when it's been interwoven into society and as a governmental tool. Okay. But I first want to kind of go over the history, because it makes no sense to talk about how it's used in society. It makes no sense to talk about it if we don't understand it in and of itself. And that in and of itself is a conundrum. So it's a conundrum within a conundrum, okay? Because the particular religion we're talking about is Christianity, because our society, our country is riddled with denominations of Christianity. There's over 245 different denominations of Christianity within the U.S. alone, and then there's over 45,000 denominations of Christianity within globally, if you will. All right. So I want to kind of this is the third part that we're on today, which is true or false. The Bible is testament of Rome's manipulation, and this is the crux, I think, of the historicity of the New Testament that I really wanted to kind of target from the beginning of, I guess, the history of the I almost said Bible, the Bible itself. We'll get into more of the history of it as we go further into the series, but this is kind of the apex tonight. But I do want to circle back around to the point as to why this is even coming up in the first place. Okay. And that is the fact that we are dealing with potentially the concept of members of our society in members of politics, for the most part, they're trying their best to wiggle in this concept of having a religious state for the most part. Okay. So every so often, as I kind of delve into this, I do want to take a moment and just reiterate why I'm doing this, why I'm talking about this for the most part. Okay. And this right here is the reason why.
Portraying himself as a religious savior. He says Election Day will be
Christian Visibility Day.
Trump has repeatedly compared his criminal trials to the crucifixion of Jesus, promoted videos calling his re-election, quote, the most important moment in human history, and that describe him as a divinely appointed ruler.
A shepherd to mankind who won't ever leave nor forsake them. So God made Trump.
He claims to be a holy warrior against an imaginary attack on Christianity.
They want to tear down crosses, but no one will be touching the cross of Christ under the Trump administration. I swear to you.
He's even selling his own version of the Bible.
We must make America pray again.
Trump is playing to a rising white Christian nationalist movement within the Republican Party.
I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists.
Christian nationalists believe that the law of the land is not the Constitution, but instead the law of God, as they interpret it. Trump supporters are increasingly overt in their calls to replace democracy with a MAGA theocracy.
The church is supposed to direct the government, and I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk.
We're meant to be a Christian nation. We should be a Christian nation.
Welcome to the end of democracy. We're here to overthrow it completely. We didn't get all the way there on January 6th, but we will endeavor to get rid of it and replace it with this right here.
I think let's, rewind that just for a second. Because sometimes what's often said is oftentimes taken as a moment of levity for whatever reason, and people don't believe what is oftentimes right in front of your face. So try again, just in case someone takes it as a joke.
Church and state junk.
We're meant to be a Christian nation. We should be a Christian nation.
Welcome to the end of democracy. We're here to overthrow it completely. We didn't get all the way there on January 6th, but we will endeavor to get rid of it and replace it with this right here.
That was a cross he was holding. The idea that the will of voters is irrelevant because God has anointed Trump was a recurring message in the efforts to overturn the 2020 election.
Because it is not Joe Biden that rules this country. Jesus Christ is the king of everything in this world. Christ is king! Christ is king! Christ is king!
In previous videos, I've highlighted how MAGA Republicans have embraced core elements of fascism. The combination of fascism and Christian nationalism is called Christofascism, a term first used half a century ago by the theologian Dorothy Zola. Fascists rise to power by characterizing their opponents as subhuman. Christofascists take it a step further by casting opponents as not just subhuman, but actually demonic.
People like Nancy Pelosi, she's a demon.
Framing opponents as enemies of God makes violence against them not only seem justifiable, but divinely sanctioned and almost inevitable.
We are going to put on the armor of God. Then maybe strap on a Glock on the side of us just in case.
When we take power, they need to be given the death penalty. And these people that are suppressing the name Christ and suppressing Christianity, they must be absolutely annihilated when we take power.
Christofascists want to strip away a wide range of rights Americans take for granted. Former Trump staffers involved in developing plans for a second Trump term have called for imposing biblical tests on immigration, overturning marriage equality, and restricting contraception. And MAGA-aligned judges are already setting their dogma ahead of the Constitution. In his concurring opinion on the case that declared frozen embryos are people, Alabama Supreme Court Chief Justice Tom Parker cited God more than 40 times and quoted the book of Genesis and other religious texts. Nothing could be more un-American than the Christian nationalist vision. So many of America's founders came here as refugees seeking religious freedom. The framers of the Constitution were adamant that religion had no role in our government. The words God, Jesus, and Christ don't appear anywhere in the Constitution. And the very first words of the Bill of Rights are a promise that, quote, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Christofascism, or any religion-based form of government, is a rejection of everything America has aspired to be. A secular, multiracial society whose inhabitants have come from everywhere, bound together by a faith in equal opportunity, democracy, and the rule of law. Beware.
So that is the reason there why I am doing what I'm doing, because of, and that's just a small tease, a small taste as to why I am doing what I am doing, because of situations such as that. Okay? Because apparently we have people who seem to think that, one, we should have been a Christian nation. No, we shouldn't. There's nothing in the Constitution, Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, so DOI. Nothing in those documents suggests that. Nothing in our Constitution suggests that. But yet we have people in Congress who seem to think that that is the way to go. And then we have people jokingly, laughing about the fact that they almost overthrew the government with the purpose of establishing, apparently getting rid of democracy and establishing what they wanted. Okay? So this is the reason why I'm doing that, doing what it is that I'm doing. which is taking what they are basically wanting to establish and saying, okay, well, what is it that you want to replace it with? You want to replace it with a particular religion. Okay, let's look at that religion. Where did it come from? What are the components of it? Let's dissect it. Let's talk about it. And the more you talk about it, the more you dissect it, the more you start recognizing that there are problems even within it. And the more you start to realize that it's better placed exactly where it currently is. So this is why I'm doing what it is that I'm doing. Okay. So now that we're there, I want to work up a theory. So far, I have worked through and targeted, for the most part, the source and origin of the Christian religion itself, which is the Roman Catholic Church Nicene Council. Okay, so it doesn't matter your denomination. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter your sect of Christianity. It all starts from Rome for the most part. But then I started peeling back components and started understanding that that there's this difference between Old Testament and New Testament, where there's more historicity with the Old Testament than there was with the New Testament. And then started getting into where the church, where the Roman Catholic Church establishes different components that maybe current denominations don't necessarily conscribe to, but it has deep roots and deep connections to the Roman Catholic Church that maybe you don't necessarily recognize. Okay, so the day of worship, for instance, or certain ideals, or certain practices, or certain beliefs, and so on and so forth, those all have connections back to the Roman Catholic Church, whether you understand it or realize it or not. And those are things I proved last week and the week before last. Okay, so now we're here and proving that the New Testament has origins in the 4th century. Okay, 300 or so odd years after Jesus' death. Well, we also talked about where the beginnings of the name Jesus Krishna, where those two titles came from, and the birth of the idea of Jesus Christ, the idea or concept, maybe not even the individual. Well, now I'm going to present a concept to you that because the Roman Catholic Church has acknowledged that maybe it doesn't necessarily know or is aware of where the New Testament writings necessarily came from. I showed last week that the Roman Catholic Church isn't aware or has acknowledged or admitted that it doesn't know. It's unaware. And the authors attributed to the New Testament apostles and you would call them apostles. They aren't necessarily certain that those authors can necessarily be attributed to those books in itself. That's the Roman Catholic Church saying that, right? So I have a theory that amongst the Nicene Council, the first Nicene Council, the writings that were brought to the council, amidst those writings were writings from the period from the Titus Flavian dynasty or reign, from that emperor. And I have a theory that it's possible that those were included from 69 AD. So let's get into it. I'm going to show you why. And as you watch this, take a moment. So this is going to be more of a reaction vid. Okay. I'm going to add commentary and hopefully we can get through it. But I really want you to take a deep dive and really watch and pay attention to these historians, accredited historians, as to how they pick apart and discern at least the first 5 books of the New Testament, or just the New Testament in itself. And that's the reason why I coined this title today. Well, you guys see it down here, but the Bible's testament of Rome's manipulation, and specifically Titus Flavian back in 69 AD. Prior to the Flavian dynasty's rule, so you had Vespasian, you had Titus, and you had Domitian. Prior to that, there was Caligula. Caligula was known for creating a situation where the Jews within that part of Rome, creating a situation where the Jews were offering pushback and fighting against the empire, because Caligula wanted his statue to be his bust, basically, but his statue, sure, to be worshipped among the pantheon within the Jewish within the Jewish tradition and Jewish religion. The Jews were not having that. That was the initial start of attempting to create a deification of the Roman emperor. And you're going to see how Titus Flavian fixed that. Let's go.
Who was Jesus? Is he a historical character? Who wrote the Gospels? Why are they written in Greek? Why did they have a pro-Roman perspective? Why was the religion headquartered in Rome? Those were the mysteries that I saw about the Gospels.
And yes, by the way, I recognize that I misspelled the word enacted. It's driving me absolutely nuts. But yes, I spelled it right down here. I have no idea why I did that. But yeah, it's driving me absolutely wild. So the fact that I cannot fix it, I have no idea why I put an I instead of an E. It's on the opposite end of the keyboard too. I have no idea. I was in a hurry today, apparently. Let's go for it.
The origin of the Christian religion has been a subject steeped in mystery for nearly 2,000 years. Joseph Atwell is one of a number of scholars today from all around the world who are questioning the historic facts behind these ancient mysteries. When examining the actual history of this era, many of the answers provided by the church and Christian scholars do not hold up to rigorous scrutiny.
This is really important for our culture, to understand where Christianity came from.
No doubt Christians have done a lot of good for the world, but then there are other Christians, often the most dogmatic, who create wars, hatred, and other harm under the disguise of religion. In studying how Christianity emerged, many of our scholars agree that it was used as a political tool to control the masses of the day, and it is still being used this way today.
The problem is that Christianity has been used as a tool by government that uses the goodness in people against them.
That I'm talking
For
about.
example, support for the wars in the Middle East has been preached to evangelical Christians as a way to speed up the end of days. This is just one example of the way that propaganda is used to control and manipulate the populace. Actually, according to my studies,
that I'm talking about,
texts, the second coming of the Christ
you have a situation where you have the government where essentially religion is being used, and even they're saying it, where religion is being used as a sort of a pseudo kind of sort of tool to basically control government, religion, yes, people, okay, ultimately, but then also there's a fiduciary aspect to it as well. Okay, so all aspects of a group of people. And you got to consider Rome was really huge at this point in time, and they had just conquered the entire section at this point in time. I do believe Titus, Rome had merged at that point. So yeah, what's the best way to control people is by controlling the mind and believing that there's more power there than just brute force alone. So yeah, I'm right along with the concept of them using this religious tool as an ability to control politically on a governmental note and on a fiduciary note and even on a spiritual note. Let's go.
Already occurred.
Maybe we need to expand the possible answers about how Christianity originated, and deeper questions need to be asked. Maybe we need to examine what political motives were behind the formation of the Christian religion.
I think it's a requirement of alert citizens to know how the Gospels were written, why they were written, who produced them, what was the purpose and back of all this. This is good citizenry. Everyone should be involved in this.
Today, we live on the brink of an immense paradigm shift, and this modern time is very parallel to the era in which Christianity emerged. Studying this ancient era,
yep, history will repeat itself if you do not know your history. Absolutely.
Today's problems, and for helping create the better world that we envision.
And the penny dropped. The penny dropped that Jesus, as a human being, never existed.
The presentation of the Jesus character, it's somewhat of a composite of many messianic leaders of the time.
Well, let's just go back
so
to the
we have a
drawing board
situation
and,
where
we'll
it's
leave aside
possibly
all of the
there's a
assumptions
composite
of Christian history, and let's just look at the text.
Different ones. So we learned on the first, I think on the first, what was it? The first, yeah, the part one, where Constantine potentially took Jesus, which was Zeus, Krishna, which was from India, and basically combined two gods into one, and the ideas and principles from different gods for the most part, and then combined the features of different gods into one god, and then religiously took components of different religions, practices of different religions for the most part, and then combine the practices of different religions into one, and you have what they would call what was the terminology used? An all-embracing religion. I mean, that's the concept of the entire Trinity. You take 3 different components of 3 different gods and you combine them into one thrice-headed, thrice-parted God, and you bring them into one. So for those people who don't believe that there's a physical component to God, you have a spirit. Those who believe in worshiping the Savior God, who is the Son who came in and sacrificed as a sacrificial lamb for the most part, you have that God. And those who believe in a Godhead and the Creator, you have that God created into one. Boom, you have a God. So you see what I'm saying? So they're saying the same thing that I'm basically have been saying for the most part. Hey, Lady Novoa, good to see you. You believe in God, or are you curious? Or are you curious, have questions about him, Jesus? Just asking, bro, that's all. Are you asking me, do I personally believe in a God, or do I, wait? Or do I have questions? Rephrase the question. I think you're asking me, well, one part of the question I can ask, do I believe in a God? Yes, I do. Do I have serious judgments or serious questions about who this Jesus Krishna character is? And do I have serious doubts about this particular person and character? Yes, I do. And that's based on just what is actually in the book in itself. So let's see. Do you believe in God? Do you believe in God, not a God? Well, to answer that question here, when you say, do you believe in God, not a God? Well, who is God? In order for me to answer that question, you have to define who that God is. There you go. Do I believe in Jesus? No, I don't. I personally do not believe that Jesus came down and died for my sins and died for my sins to save me in order that I might be redeemed. And the reason why I don't believe that is very, very simple. I do not believe a primordial being is unable to provide saving for my sins or for my iniquities. A primordial being who's able to create matter from nothing is able to do all things and does not need a mediator, does not need an intercessor. Hey, Braxton, good to see you, sir. A primordial being who just is to be worshiped, is to be praised. And nothing created should be worshiped and praised, but only the created. I'm sorry, only the creator and not the created. So are you teaching what's real or what this show about? What this show about? I'm curious. So are you teaching what's real? I'm not sure what you mean. I think you're asking, am I teaching only what is real? Well, that is left on, honestly, objectively, that's only what is left to your interpretation. The point of what I'm doing here is only providing the information. I can't tell you what to do, what to do from here on out. If what I provide here is for you to then assess and say, that's for you to decide. That's the difference between most people who believe and don't believe. The people who believe, most people, especially with conviction, most people would say that, you're wrong for not believing. There's something wrong with you for not believing. What's obvious, because this book right here, I don't have the book in front of me, but what I can do is this. So, this book right here, biblically speaking, this book right here is the truth because the book says it's the truth. Well, I can write something, and 10 years from now, you can read it and says, well, it says that it's the truth. So, okay, what this show about? What information there is or isn't a God? Okay. Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, so if your mindset is that Jesus is God, then from your perspective, I'm basically saying there isn't a God, right? But what I'm proposing is that Jesus is not a God. And I'm proposing that in the book, there was a God before Jesus. And what I'm proposing is that the God before Jesus said he was God before Jesus, and God didn't change that because Jesus came along. And what I'm proposing, if you want to just get to the skinny, what I'm proposing is that Christianity came around because government wanted to come around and control and manipulate in order to gain some sort of control, manipulation, and I wouldn't say favor, but some sort of confusion amongst the people because the people were vulnerable, weak, and available to do so. So let's invent something in order to say you need an intermediator in order to get to God. So I am going to act as that intermediator in the same way that Jesus is the intermediator to God. And so how about this? I'm the priest, okay? And I'm going to write this book, okay? I'm going to create this story. I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to write it in the language that you can't read and only I can read it, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what the book says, and you're going to have faith in me because I am the chosen one. And the chosen one chose me. The vicar of Christ chose me because I'm the authority. I'm not only the authority spiritually, but I'm also the authority governmentally, right? And then here's what happens. You sinned. Well, here are the 10 things you're not supposed to do. And then me and my other people who look like me, who are above you citizen-wise, we also made up a few things based on that list that you're not supposed to do too. And you can't question us because you're poor. You sinned. You did some things. Great. Pay us X amount of, coins and silver, right? And then I can pray on your behalf because I have favor from the Holy Father, right? And I can pray that your seat won't be warm for you in hell, but rather it's cold, right? That sounds like manipulation. But I won't give you the book so you can read and see if that makes any sense yourself. Then years down the road, when you finally get access to the book and you read it, someone like a Martin Luther gets it and becomes a presbyter. He reads it and says, this shit don't make no damn sense. Y'all been lying to us all the time. And then you hang that person because he's telling the truth. And then you spend some time during the Crusades killing people, burning people at the stake, all because they simply didn't conform to your newfound religion that just got started. Meanwhile, prior to that religion, guess what happened? People were worshiping different deities and different gods that were working for them for hundreds of years. Maybe they were, worshiping a different sun god. Maybe they were worshiping an heiress. Maybe they were worshiping or grounding themselves to the spirits and channeling just nature around them because that's what their ancestors did. But the new religion called them pagans and sorcery and witchcraft. That altar looks evil. You mean it looks like the same altar that you have in your church, where the wine looks like blood, and the bread and the bread or the cracker looks like it's supposed to represent the body of Christ, and you do that once a month in remembrance of a dead person? That sounds like a ritual to me. Where there's candles around the monstrance, that sounds like the Eucharist. That sounds like a seance where you sing a song on the altar. But somebody else's seance is evil. but you don't recognize as Christians you're doing the same thing. So the point that I'm making here is that looking at the Bible itself, the Bible is very clear that even though I may disagree with the Old Testament God, at least there was a God who said, I am God and worship no God before me. Where did this Jesus fellow come from? So when you ask me, do I believe in God or do I believe in a God? Well, you have to define who God is in order for me to answer that question. Because you ask that question as if it is only absolute, that there's only one God. And from your mindset, that's only subjective. For me, if I were to ask someone that question, I would ask, what God do you believe in? Or do you believe in a higher power? And if so, who is your higher power? In order for it to be an objective question. So the point of tonight on these series here is to do a multitude of things. Is to provide information to people who are provide information to people who are single-minded. Because there are Christians who don't know this information, who seem to think that a nation should be Christian because that's all they know. They know since they step foot in a church and they go to church on Sunday because that's what their mama told them, that they should be going to church on Sunday. They have no idea why they have been programmed to go to church on Sunday. Because I was in the Baptist church going to church on Sunday, and I had no idea why I was going to church on Sunday. I'm just programmed to go to church on Sunday. And quite frankly, worshiping a white Jesus with blonde hair and blue eyes, looking like the Aryan race. So, I'm wanting to prove at the very least that the overarching idea of Christianity, to me, the target of it being Jesus, yes, I'm going to go ahead and say it, is a farce. Once we start there, then we can go back and go ahead and target the true source, which is a overarching deity, which is the Father, God. Now we can start getting into the meat and potatoes of the Bible. Because the Bible itself has a bunch of things in it that apparently people want to beat over our heads. Like, for instance, it's okay basically to go ahead and buy a woman that you've just graped, so as long as you can afford her after you graped her. Oh, we want to remove that part. So as long as we can just go ahead and get rid of the parts, get rid of the people who align with the parts that we don't like. Boy, gotta love that cherry picking. Most of the Bible is a lot of people saying that I had a dream. Let me go tell somebody about my dream. I read one part where it says the Lord remembered, I think the Lord remembered Sarah, or the Lord remembered somebody. I'm like, well, damn, did somebody interview the Lord? Who's writing this shit down? Did God come down and say, hey, I remembered somebody? How do we know that the Lord remembered somebody? Is somebody paying attention to the fact that that this is saying in the third person that the Lord remembered somebody, unless we're paying attention to the fact that this is a story, folks. People will read something in a book, one phrase, and then I'm like, okay, well, what does that one phrase tie to? Go back a whole book, a whole chapter, and it starts off with the fact that it is a dream that this man had about a rock and a pillar. I think it was what was it? What was it? Genesis? Damn, no. I think it was Leviticus. I think I was in. Basically, anything that went against the Bible and Catholicism went on. Yeah. Oh. Music tips and reviews with Jay. Well, hi there. I didn't even see you there. Love that you're straightforward on this topic. A lot of people don't know this information. Salute. Well, salute to you. I have no idea who you are, but thanks for coming into the foxhole. I appreciate it. I'm sorry I was on a rant and did not see you in, but welcome. Sorry, I went on a rant. Lady Novoa got me riled up. I appreciate it. I will be careful. And I am more than understanding that there is a entity that does provide blessings and prosperity to people. That part I don't want to take from people. I don't wish to do that to anybody. I don't want to. Let me make that very clear. What I wish to do is give people a different perspective that maybe, if adjusted, would provide a clearer understanding of what is there versus what is oftentimes obscured by people who are blinded themselves when they talk about it. Because for years I sat in a pew listening to people who were no more clearer than I was. Just for me to ask them one question. And they were befuddled. And that's when I knew I had to leave that church. I think that's, yeah, I knew I had to leave. And then, of course, I think I told you already, they told me I was influenced by the devil because I was asking questions. Well, some shit don't make sense. Who the hell was Jesus talking to? If he's God, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane. If he's God, who the fuck was he talking to? It's a fair question. And I was a teenager. You're an adult. You couldn't put that together? Damn it. Okay. Sorry, missing comments here. Sorry. Appreciate you, Lady Novo. I appreciate it. Yes, sir. Along with demon worship too, of course. Look it up. Oh, okay. All right. And you said that was in 1500s England. That's an interesting time. England. All right. Wrote it down. Thank you. Appreciate it. Is that needed, you think? Is what needed? it shouldn't be a problem to ask questions in church. That's how you learn. Bible study Sunday school is the best. You would think. However, oftentimes asking questions seems heretical in certain spaces, especially if you're challenging someone very high up and they look befuddled in front of people. See, I've been standing on business all my life, so I had a knack for asking people things in front of people, right up front. How you like that? And yeah. So, all right. So if you have any more questions, Lady Navoa, by all means, keep them coming. I like it. We're going to proceed.
Fresh, and consider every possibility. Let's open the whole game up.
Can you think that Christianity is really paganism by a different name? Now it feels completely obvious.
Some of us are saying that this was a sun god turned into a Jewish man.
In all of this, we're dealing with literature. We're not dealing with history. So the answer is no, there is no history to this character of Jesus. It's entirely a literary creation.
Some of our Bible scholars are mavericks, working outside the restrictions of mainstream religious institutions. This allows them the freedom to provide fresh insights and draw some startling conclusions about how Christianity was formed.
I began reading a number of books on the subject. This turned into a decade-long research.
For Joseph Atwell, the key was in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the only Jewish literature ever discovered from the 1st century AD or CE, the time that Jesus would have been preaching among the Jews.
The characters in the Dead Sea Scrolls were militaristic, and you could see that this movement wanted to push the foreigners out of Israel. They were fundamentalists, whereas the characters in the Gospel are different. They are pacifistic. They are turning the other cheek. They're giving to Caesar what is Caesar's. How did a movement like Christianity come to exist in a region that was occupied by Roman soldiers and had Jewish zealots within it that were going to push these Romans out? How was that possible? I began studying the other two major works of the era, the New Testament and Wars of the Jews by Josephus, a Roman court historian who described the war between the Romans and the Jews in the first century.
Remember that name, Josephus.
While reading these works side by side, I noticed an amazing connection between them. Certain events from the ministry of Jesus seem to closely parallel episodes from the military campaign of Roman Caesar Titus Flavius, a campaign which took place 40 years after Jesus supposedly lived. My efforts to understand these connections led me to an incredible discovery. Christianity had been invented by a little-known family of Roman Caesars, the Flavians, and they left us documents to prove it.
The Flavians are not a household name, and yet it's the Flavians who completely reshaped the Roman Empire. In Rome, of course, there's the Colosseum, which is understood to be the best-known monument of the ancient Roman Empire, perhaps. The Colosseum is, in fact, a Flavian construction produced during the Flavian period.
Okay, so you see the time frame, 69. Did I write that down right? Yep, 69 to... Yep, I did. 69 to 96. Well, they say, well, I say AD, but it's still CE. That's still correct. Okay. All right. Same thing. All right. Let's go.
It's under the Flavians that both Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity take shape.
Why would the Flavians be interested in creating religions? Much like today, their era was marked by political power struggles, a bankrupt economy, religious conflicts, and endless wars. In the midst of this turmoil, the Flavians seized control of the Roman Empire and ushered in an immense paradigm shift. To understand the Flavians' rise to power, we need to go back to the reign of the previous powerful rulers, the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Beginning with Julius Caesar in the year 49 BCE, the Julio-Claudians ruled Rome for over 100 years, transforming the government from a republic into an empire. This family contained all the famous Caesars.
It'll be the whole thing. If I don't get to it, all of it today, Then next week I'll finish it, Paul. If it gets to a certain point, I will fast forward and get to the main part. But yes, most of it.
Julius, who predated the time of Jesus, Augustus, who was Caesar at the time of Jesus' supposed birth, Tiberius, who ruled during Jesus' supposed death, followed by the infamous Caligula. Then Claudius,
this guy.
and ending the Julio-Claudian dynasty with Nero, whose reign begins in 54 CE.
The Julio-Claudians enjoyed a godlike status until the family degenerated and began to damage the Roman Empire.
By the time of Nero, his famous decadence was bankrupting the empire, and the Jews of Judea were staging a huge rebellion against their Roman rulers.
Judea was one of the many conquered provinces that made up the Roman Empire. This region, which was also known as Palestine, was controlled by a family that served as Rome's tax collector, the Herods.
Okay,
they were a Greco-Arab family, somewhat possibly Judaized, though only Judaized when it was convenient to please the subjects they were given, who were put in power in Palestine and destroyed the previous Jewish ruling family, the Maccabean family, root and stalk.
Besides,
yes, yes, Mr. Bennett, I did notice I misspelled enacted in the video. I was in a hurry, so yes, but I spelled it right down here, so I get a one for right and 1 for wrong. I have no idea why that did that, but it's driving me crazy that I can't fix it. So it is what it is. Yeah, drive me crazy.
being heavily taxed and ruled by a non-Jewish family put in power by Rome, the Jews were further inflamed by the requirement that a statue of the Caesar be placed for worship in every temple throughout the empire.
I said that.
In the Roman Empire, you
And I
could
read
pretty
that
much
somewhere.
have any god you want, but legally you had to submit to the emperor as a god as well. You had to at least acknowledge
I said that too.
The Roman leader was also a divine figure. But the Jews would not have any of it.
It's fundamental to Jewish belief that you shall make no graven images. It's one of the commandments given at Sinai by God. So the Jews never made representations of God.
The Jews had a very different type of religion. They had a religion which was much more focused on the book
That's
and
right.
less focused upon cultic statues. This
That's
presented
right.
a real problem for the Romans. They tried to install
That's because the Ten
statues
Commandments
of
specifically
Caesar,
says,
but,
make no
the
engraven
Jews weren't
image.
going to buy that at all. In fact, it aggravated them. It enraged them. And the Romans really, I think, didn't understand this. It's not statues, it's books.
And those books contained what are known as the Jewish messianic prophecies.
The thing that most moved the Jews' revolt against Rome was an obscure prophecy from among their writings that a world ruler would come out of Palestine.
Holy books inspired the Jews to expect a redeemer who would redeem Israel, rescue Israel, restore Israel to power and leadership in the world.
The Messiah that the literature described was a warrior. The Messiahs would have claimed the same attributes that David did. David could overcome any army because God gave him the power to do it. If you had the power of God, you could easily defeat the Roman army. The people rebelled against Rome and were led by a messianic movement that had a series of messiahs that had come forward to fight against the Roman Empire.
The Hebrew word Messiah is translated into Greek as Christos, or Christ,
Christos.
so the title of Christ can describe any of the numerous messiahs of this movement.
Yes.
Now, I have stated that essentially the title is Christos is a title, but I also made a statement that the figure Jesus Christ is essentially no more prolific. I mean, if you let the Muslims speak or any other religion speak, Jesus Christ is no more prolific than Noah or Moses or Methuselah or Enoch, for instance. Hell, Enoch is more prolific than that, if you will, only because of what Enoch was able to do in his own right. Hell, Enoch has a whole book. Just saying. But for the most part, how they describe it based off of the text itself, the concept is that a Messiah could be someone who's able to, a warrior in a sense. Okay? So listen to how they put that together.
The word Christ or Christians can refer to the Palestine Messianic movement, but it's a later term. It's a later reformulation of the Messianic movement in Palestine.
This movement rebels against Rome in 66 and is successful. It actually defeats them militarily, so it must have been a huge movement. The victorious Jews set up a nation state directly in the Roman Empire.
And the Romans had to do something about it. There was a real danger that this Messianic movement could not only boil over in Judea itself, but could spread to other Jewish communities in other parts of the Roman Empire.
Rome ruled its colonies with a rod of iron, and any resistance was going to be met with brute force.
At this time during Nero's reign, two of the finest military men in the empire were the Flavians, Vespasian and his son Titus.
Vespasian and Titus were military men. They spent a great deal of their life outside of Rome. For over a decade, they had waged war against the Druids in Brittany and Gaul. Vespasian and Titus were successful in essentially destroying the Druids. They left behind no historical record of their existence.
Damn, that's pretty bad.
It's the Flavians that Nero calls upon when he needs to suppress the Jews' rebellion in Judea.
Nero responded by asking his best general, Vespasian, and his son Titus to go into Judea with a huge army, 60, 70,000 troops, and a similar number of support individuals. So they meant business. The Romans came down to crush the rebellion.
In the year 66 CE, the Flavians begin their military campaign against the Jews. They start further north in Galilee, where the first of three key events takes place. They destroy the Jewish towns of Galilee. They also capture a Jewish rebel who later becomes a critical figure in the formulation of Christianity.
This is where they captured one of the leaders of the rebellion, a Jew named Josephus Bar Matthias. Now, Josephus presented himself to the Flavians as a prophet.
He survived. He survived apparently by telling Vespasian that the prophecies of the Jews pointed out that Vespasian would become emperor. And of course he did. So Vespasian quite liked Josephus. He used him as a translator in his entourage. He used him to appeal to the rebels to surrender.
At this point, Josephus became a turncoat and worked with the Flavians against the rebellion.
What a sneaky guy.
Meanwhile, chaos is increasing back in Rome, where Nero's rule is being threatened.
In the year 68, the Senate found the courage to depose Nero and he committed suicide. Now, in that circumstance, Vespasian was a prime candidate to become emperor.
In the middle of this war, Vespasian returned to Rome and seized the throne. The Flavians then became the imperial family.
With Vespasian becoming the new Caesar in Rome, Titus stays behind on the battlefield and sets his sights on Jerusalem, where the other two key events take place. Titus encircles Jerusalem with a wall, and finally he raises the temple, leaving not one stone atop another.
It took a while. They eventually had to bring on starvation by building a wall, a barricade entirely enveloping the city.
What story does that sound like, people?
What happens, of course, is the temple in 70 is completely destroyed.
For the Jews, it was the ultimate calamity because, of course, this was the house of their god, and it was destroyed by the Romans quite thoroughly. Titus, of course, was the victor of this great siege. Titus carried the spoils of this captured city back to Rome for his triumph. He took the treasures of the temple, their famous 7-branch candlestick. You can see it on the arch of Titus.
Yes, the menorah.
It celebrates that tremendous victory of Rome, again triumphant, and Titus, of course, is the hero of the day.
All of the artifacts from the temple that they seized, they put on public display in what they refer to as the Palace of Peace, except for one item. The Jewish scripture, Josephus records that the Flavians took and placed in their private palace where no one was allowed to see it.
Wonder why.
Although Titus Flavius successfully ended the rebellion in Judea, another rebellion soon broke out in Alexandria, Egypt. The Flavians were clear that this was not the end of the Jewish Messianic movement. They also recognized that it was the Jews' Messianic literature that was fueling this movement. So
now I wonder why it's important to hide the Jewish literature, number one. And if you wanted to seize control over something and control the people, you need, yes, to control the people, but you also need to control their literature, control what they're learning. Just bring it back home for a little bit. Doesn't that kind of sound like certain political parties wanting to burn books and ban books and oh, don't mind me.
Once they captured the Jewish scripture, they had all other copies of it destroyed.
Oh, I just said that. Damn it. Did that sound like a Hitlerish thing to do? It's not like in America, they're not trying to ban books and keep people from learning things.
And that's why the Dead Sea Scrolls had to have been buried in a cave, because that was the only way they could be safe from the Roman destruction.
Here we
go. There was not a single scrap of literature found from the Messianic movement until the scrolls were discovered.
Until the
That's
Dead Sea Scrolls. Right
because
here.
they're the only real voice of the Messianic movement that we have.
And the real voice of the Jews' Messianic movement, according to our scholars, was violent and militaristic, not the pacifistic version depicted in the
because of
Gospels.
Titus, that's the
War
reason why
against
we
Rome
had
was
the
a
Dead Sea
Messianic war.
Scrolls.
So that's why I say
Thank you,
that
Titus.
the scrolls are not only the literature of the Messianic movement in Palestine, they're also the literature of the war against Rome.
The Romans needed to subdue the Jews' religion, so they set about influencing it and changing it.
They realise they can't destroy the Jewish religion altogether. That's not their objective. They realise they're sensible enough to realise that they can't do that. So what you have to do is try to create a type of Judaism that is benign.
A type of Judaism.
It's exactly coinciding with the rise of the Flavian dynasty is the arrival of two benign forms of Jewish ideology.
Right there.
It's during this
Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity. They are a subsect of Judaism.
period that a new literature enters history, which describes a peace-loving, turn-the-other-cheek-preaching Jewish Messiah named Jesus Christ. But if the Flavians wrote the Gospels, how could a Roman family know how to write Jewish literature that refers to Jewish prophecy? The answer lies in the Flavians' collaborations with a number of Jewish intellectuals, beginning with their own court historian, Josephus.
Josephus arrives back in Rome with Titus. He becomes an adopted member of the Flavian family. An amazing turn of events for the Jewish turncoat. He becomes Flavius Josephus. Josephus at this time begins writing the history of the war, and he records that Titus gave him the Jewish scripture. Josephus's histories have always been associated with the origins of Christianity.
Time and again you can find parallels between what Josephus writes and what turns up in the Gospels. It's a powerful evidence of their true origin.
In reading the works of Josephus side by side with the Gospels, scholars have noticed parallels between the two works. It appears as though the history of Josephus records events that fulfill the prophecies of the Old and New Testaments. Early Christians understood this connection. In fact, when the Bible first began to be printed in the Middle Ages, it included the history of Josephus.
He was employed to write the official history that we have. The other histories from this period have been destroyed ruthlessly by the Romans. Josephus tells us this in very chilling passages, how the Romans exerted complete control of the literature of this period. There were alternative histories of the Jewish war written. Well, the Romans rounded up the writers of those histories and executed them. They rounded up all the copies of those histories and destroyed them. That is to say, they ruthlessly wiped out any alternative history, so that the only history we have is written by Josephus. And let's remember who Josephus was.
Chief propagandist of the Flavian dynasty, and he was very, very successful. He moved back to Rome. He was...
Oh, I see. Okay, that's what they're getting into right now. They haven't gotten to that part yet, but they're getting into that now. All right, I see what you mean. All right. Yep, stand by for that, Paul. They're getting to that now.
Was given an apartment in the emperor's own townhouse, and he...
And they're not saying that the Flavians necessarily wrote it. They're saying that Josephus Bar Mathia wrote the New Testament.
Was appointed the chronicler of the Roman Jewish War, using Vespasian's own diaries of the events.
Also in the pages of his history, Josephus declares that the Jews' Messiah or Christ is none other than Flavius Vespasian and his dynastic family.
To put it succinctly, Josephus says that there was a prophecy that a world ruler would come out of Palestine. The Jews thought this applied to one of their own. They were wrong in their interpretations. He used the most cynical interpretation. He applied it to the rise of the Roman emperor in Palestine.
Josephus recorded that the Messianic prophecies foresaw not a Jew, but Vespasian and his dynasty. In fact, all of the Flavian historians recorded that the Flavian Caesar was the Christ.
It was important to the Flavians that they be seen as the Christ, as divine and godlike, and this was not mere vanity. The Julio-Claudians before them had already established that presenting themselves as gods was a powerful tool in controlling their subjects. When the Flavians took over the throne, they inherited an enormous bureaucracy that was already in place, the imperial cult, which was dedicated to promoting the idea of Caesar as a god.
Another part of the puzzle is the Roman imperial cult. Why is it important? Well, because it coincides with that same period of time as the emergence of the Christ cult.
You had a whole social community. The whole social structure of these conquered territories was governed by the imperial cult. And if you wanted to succeed, the key social community to join was the imperial cult, because that's where...
Well, the problem with that theory, it's possible, but the problem with that theory is that all of this happened, well, let's see. The Flavians existed after Jesus. So Jesus was 33 AD. The Flavians were after 69 AD. Well, 69 AD and afterwards. So yes, that is possible. Potentially speaking. Listen to it a little bit further and then let me know what you think. What they are doing is essentially taking what Josephus wrote in either his diary or taking the writings from the testimonies from Josephus and the Flavians' writings themselves, and then also comparing. Well, I'll let them finish.
All the movers and shakers were.
This idea of the emperor becoming an object of worship was well established in the Roman system before Vespasian and Titus came along. It was prevalent in all major centres. It had its own priesthood. There was a ceremony, an annual celebration, annual games for the imperial cult. Now, it had many characteristics which would later colour the Christian cult. It grew in the same centres. It made claims that were later transferred to Christ.
The Julio-Claudians had claimed that they were of divine descent and that they were therefore legitimate. Their power base was the Roman aristocracy, the Roman nobility. All of that collapsed into this power vacuum. Vespasian was declared emperor by the troops, by the Roman army. So effectively, it was a military coup. With the change of dynasty, they have to create a whole mythology to legitimize that dynasty. At the same time, they're creating a whole mythology to counter Jewish messianism. Somewhere along the line, those two things get mixed together.
When Vespasian died, Titus began the process of having his father deified. This is a complicated process because only the Roman Senate can bestow on an individual the title of deus or god. Titus came to the Senate and presented evidence that the life of his father had been divine. Certainly this would have included the military campaign that the Flavians waged through Judea. And it's at this time I think the Gospels were written, because the theological structure in the Gospels of a God the Father and the Son of God is the same one that Titus would have been presenting to the Roman Senate. Well, the Roman Senate did accept Titus's evidence, and Vespasian was deified and became a god. Titus therefore became a son of God.
The Arch of Titus that still stands in modern Rome today is inscribed with a dedication to the divine Titus, son of the divine Vespasian, or son of a god. This imperial cult, set up to worship Caesar as god, also provided the basis for the structure of the Roman Catholic Church.
Now, the rituals, paraphernalia and symbols of paganism were transferred wholesale to the Christian church. The most obvious and clear example is where the title of the pagan chief priest of Rome, the Pontifex Maximus, became the title of the Pope, the Christian Pope. If you look at who held the original bishop positions in the Catholic Church in those early times, you will see that they are members of the same pagan aristocracy. They simply changed their clothing a little bit. They wore the same garments, but they wore slightly different headdresses. They had become from being a priest of a pagan cult to being a priest of Rome.
So this is the part where I say that when the Roman Catholic Church essentially made their transition from one thing to another, essentially all they did was just switch. All of the statues that were in today's time, you may look at the statue and say, that's pagan. Well, at that time, all they would do is just take a statue of Pan, and rename the statue from Pan to Moses. Or they would take a statue of Demeter or of the moon goddess and change the moon goddess's name to Mary, or or Semiramis to Mary, and Tammuz to Jesus. Okay, Semiramis is the mother, the queen mother, and Tammuz is the little baby that she's oftentimes holding. That little baby is Jesus, and the mother is Mary. So that transition was like that, just change the statues. So if you ever look on top of Saint Peter's Basilica, and you see all of those statues that they would say are Saint Michael, Saint John, Saint Paul, whatever the case may be, well, those used to be named something else. They just changed the name up. You see what I'm saying? All right, proceed.
Vatican now stands. There was once a pagan temple which celebrated the mysteries of a dying and resurrecting God-man who wasn't Jesus. There are many churches in Rome, I've been to a few, where you go above into the church and there is Jesus, and you go underneath and there's a little sanctuary of Mithras, and it's basically the same figure.
So the Roman plot to invent Christianity is just so clever when you think about it. Through the Pope, who is God's representative on earth, they no longer needed expensive standing armies.
Okay, so Vicarius Filii Dei, okay, Vicar of Christ, okay, or Vicar of God. Actually, it's called Vicar of God, okay, all right. That's God's representative, or the vicar. That's what's on the Pope's crown, is Vicarius Filii Dei, okay? That's what that means. So the Roman emperor changed over to the Pope. Okay, that's what happened there. And now the Pope is essentially deified. So when all the cardinals and all of the bishops essentially vote on a new Pope, essentially they are what's the word I'm looking for? Not christening, but I can't think of the word now. But they are establishing a new quote unquote deity, essentially, is what they're doing, to head the church, head the government over at the Vatican. Now, it's not technically known that the Holy Father is a deity publicly, but the crown that is worn on the Pope's head literally says Vicar Filii Dei, God's representative. Literally, like that's what that means. And historically speaking, the Pope's position is a deified position. And all of Christianity comes from that one position, the Pope, whether you like it or not.
Wars and punishment of disobedient peasants, they could, through religion, rule their subjects.
Over time, Roman Christianity propagated throughout the empire by way of the mass media of the day, the Roman roads. The Romans must have approved of this new religion because, as some scholars ask, if the Gospels really were Jewish literature about a Roman sentenced criminal, why wouldn't they have been destroyed?
One of the really surprising things for me was to realize the extent of Roman control of propaganda and of literature. So that when you suddenly get all of this Christian literature arising in this period, one has to ask, well, how did that happen? The conclusion that one has to reach is that that could not have happened without some degree of complicity on the part of the Romans, so that one is led to the conclusion that the Romans must be involved in the production of this literature.
To produce and disseminate this literature was a huge undertaking, and the Flavians undoubtedly had collaborators. We know they were funded by the wealthiest family in the world at this time, the Alexanders, a Jewish family who served as Rome's tax collectors in Egypt. Like the Herods in Judea, the Alexanders had strong motivation to keep the Jews' messianic movement from threatening their position and their wealth. One of their family members was Philo of Alexandria, a famous Jewish theologian who was already writing works that combined Jewish beliefs with the modern Greek and Roman pagan beliefs of the day. Many scholars agree that his writings form the basis for much of the philosophy of Christianity.
In these pages
which
is,
Reformation?
Practically every concept that you can find within Christianity. He combined Greek philosophy, and he took that and he combined it with Judaism. On top of that, he was from an extremely wealthy family.
Are you talking
this
about
is important because you have to follow the.
Are you talking about the Protestants, or are you talking about the Great Schism? Which one? I think I know what you're talking about. Which one?
Funny when you're looking at major trends, new paradigms being set. And if you look at his family, then you start seeing, well, this is interesting because now we're starting to come across the Flavians again. His relatives were very involved with the Flavians. That whole area is where we want to look very closely.
Okay, now I'm going to skip forward just a little bit.
For the Christian origins.
It's from exactly this.
Right about.
Left behind are the Gospels themselves.
Here we go.
I began working on the study of the Gospels in the 1970s, and I look at texts in terms of how were these composed, what does understanding their structure tell you about who wrote them and why they were written. These texts were not independent Jewish texts, but they were created as literary works using classical literary models.
If we expect that this is the testimony of witnesses, we've got a major problem. We actually have 4 anonymous documents. They were not written by the named people on those documents. This is simply church tradition that the Gospels are so named, according to Mark, according to Matthew. So this idea that the Gospels are reliable testimony is patent nonsense.
Why are the Gospels called Gospels? That's a critical question. The word gospel in Greek is evangelion, and it means good news of military victory.
Okay, Protestant. Okay, all right. I was wondering which one you were talking about. Got it. Okay. And yes, you're right.
Whose military victory? But they were created as literary works using classical literary models.
About
if we expect that this is the testimony
what the gospel means,
of witnesses,
which is good
we've
news.
got a major problem.
I heard that in the Baptist
we
church.
actually had 4 anonymous documents.
But of course,
they were
not the full story.
Written by the named people on those documents. This is simply church tradition that the Gospels are so named,
good
according
news.
to Mark, according to Matthew. So this idea that the Gospels are reliable testimony is patent nonsense.
Why are the Gospels called Gospels? That's a critical question. The word gospel in Greek is evangelion, and it means good news of military victory. Whose military victory are we celebrating here in these Gospels? Well, it seems to me that we are celebrating clearly the Roman military victory, because these events, the Battle of Gadara, the Battle of the Lake of Galilee, the successful Battle of Jerusalem, these are battles that the Romans won. Why are the Gospels celebrating battles that the Jews lost, if these things were written by the Jews?
The fact that the Gospels are known to us in Greek and not in Aramaic or Hebrew is, I think, just evidence of their authorship. They were not written by any followers of Jesus who would have surely spoken Aramaic, and if they had been fishermen and simple folk, they would not have had the literal skills to write them anyway.
If we look closely, there actually are clues in the Gospels that point to who the true authors were.
Just so you can see, good news of military victory. Okay. Back to it.
Portraying himself.
Whoops, wrong one.
A lot of the Christian literature advocates turning away from the Jewish law and obeying Roman law. Well, this fits perfectly into Roman propaganda purposes. And then you have, in general, the portrayal of Jesus as the peaceful Jew who is wandering around in what is depicted as a sort of a pastoral scenes, talking to fishermen and farmers and so forth, when in fact, this is a war zone. Judea is a war zone. And you ask yourself, well, why is it not portrayed as a war zone?
I mean, they really had it down pat. They have Jesus saying, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, which is basically in response to talking about money. Whose benefit would that be? It's so blatantly obvious.
The perception of Roman characters in the Gospels, they're all interpreted in a favourable light. They are pro-Roman. They do not depict the Romans as the forces of evil. They reverse that. It's the Jews who become the forces of darkness. It's very striking that various passages in the Gospels refer to the Jews as some people separate from the heroes of Jesus and his disciples. The Jews are those who object. The Jews are those who try to thwart the divine plan. Now, that gives us a clue, certainly, to who were the true authors of this book.
They are works of literature created by people who are trained in Jewish literature, but whose values are pro-Roman.
The Romans wanted to promote anti-Semitism, and so they arranged the story of the beloved man God, Jesus Christ, to appear as if the Jews had brought about his death. Because of this, the Jews would have to suffer anti-Semitism throughout history.
So this was a piece of work that could not have been done except by a fairly established literary team, such as the literary team that was in Rome actually writing the books of Josephus. I mean, that was written by a literary team, and it was written as one of the attempts to give prominence to the Flavian Caesars, which the Gospels also do. So it is extremely likely that the Gospels, as a form of epic, designed to magnify allegorically the Roman Caesars, is also written at the court of the Flavian emperors.
But the Jesus story takes place many decades before the Flavians came to power. Why would the Flavians create a work about a Jewish Messiah that wasn't even from their own era?
All right,
the Gospels were very
Here's
precisely backdated 40 years. Jesus' ministry was started in 30 CE, exactly 40 years from the destruction of the temple. His ministry ends at Passover, 33 CE, which is 40 years before the end of the Jewish-Roman War, which occurred at Passover in 73 CE with the famous Battle of Masada.
The Gospels are backdated into the period of Pontius Pilate. That is to say, before the First Jewish War, which is to say, in the Julio-Claudian period. But this is typical of Flavian literature. It's a Flavian technique. What they do is they backdate this story into the period of their enemies, namely the Julio-Claudians. And so generation after generation of Christian scholar and even secular historians go hunting in the Julio-Claudian period for the origins of the Gospels. They don't really find any answers there. There are allusions in the Gospels to the destruction of the temple. The most reasonable answer to that is that these texts were written after the destruction of the temple. That is to say, in the Flavian period, after the change of dynasty.
This backdating of the story of Jesus Christ, 40 years earlier from the time the Gospels may actually have been written, explains why many of the prophecies of Jesus came true within exactly 40 years.
What does this all add up to? In my view, the thing that is most significant is the research by Joseph Atwill in his book Caesar's Messiah, which suggests that the Gospels were actually created as works of Roman propaganda at the end of the Roman-Jewish War under the reign of the Flavian emperors, that is Titus Caesar and Vespasian Caesar. And if you end up worshipping Jesus, what you'll really end up doing is worshipping Caesar in disguise.
This may have been how the Flavians finally got the Jews to worship Caesar as a god, by giving them Jesus Christ, a Messiah more to the Romans' liking. But is there any actual history to this character? Where did he really come from?
The mystery, to me, begins with his very name. In Greek,
right,
Jesus means Savior and Christ means the Messiah. This didn't strike me as something you would call a young child.
These two words are already important within Judaism before Jesus Christ supposedly existed. Major biblical figures to a Jewish Greek-speaking populace would already be called Christ. Their ears would already be acclimated to accepting this title. So it isn't just a unique name of a single person who just suddenly popped up.
What did we actually know about Jesus Christ the man?
I don't think that Jesus can be historically defended. I don't think there's any evidence that we can extend to that particular Jesus.
So when you actually set out to investigate the historical Jesus as opposed to the Christ of faith, you very abruptly enter a void. You find that whereas you might imagine the core details of Jesus are readily known and accessible, you actually discover there's no such thing.
Further, there had never been any archaeologic evidence of Jesus Christ that had ever been discovered.
You cannot find an established and incontrovertible biography of Jesus at all. It doesn't exist. You enter a strange twilight zone of early Christian belief. What we have here is not a movement that's grown on the accretion of legends on a real flesh and blood man, but instead the development of a religious movement around the idea of a man.
There isn't even an actual physical description of what Jesus looked like anywhere in the Gospels.
The presentation of the Jesus character, it's somewhat of a composite of many messianic leaders of the time. Many messianic leaders of the time, most or all of whom came to a bad end, usually by crucifixion, because crucifixion was the Roman punishment for seditious activity.
And the penny dropped that Jesus, as a human being, never existed.
In all of this, we're dealing with literature. We're not dealing with history. So the answer is no, there is no history to this character of Jesus. It's entirely a literary creation.
What the Romans did was they saw the Jews' reliance and belief in prophecy. So they said, okay, they want a prophet, let's give them one.
It seems that in the construction of the literary character Jesus Christ, the Roman authors borrowed religious concepts not only from Judaism, but also from other gods and religions that they knew. Some scholars have noticed the similarities between the story of Jesus and the ancient pagan mysteries.
Okay, so that seems consistent with the other
mythology. We find this
documentary
whole strain of
I
thought
showed
called
about
solar
the Nicene
mythology.
Council.
Many gods are taking on solar attributes because as agricultural communities become more important,
three now
the
saying the
sun
same thing.
becomes a big focus. The most obvious reasons of planting and harvesting. The sun is then personified. So now we have a male sun god. It becomes a religion in many parts of the world.
Krishna, we got Egypt,
Christianity usurped
India.
a tremendous amount of sun worship. Some of us are saying that this was a sun god turned into a Jewish man. This December 25th birthday was in fact the winter solstice. This is really in fact the birth of the god of light. December 25th actually is the end of a 3-day period of when the sun stands still. The sun appears to be dying as the days become shorter, and the sun is reborn at that point.
Across the ancient world, there was this form of experiential and philosophical spirituality in these mystery cults, or mystery schools. And at the center of these schools, you would find a mythos, which was an initiatory myth, a symbolic myth, which would help people who were going through the initiatory process come to this spiritual awakening, this knowledge, this what they called gnosis. And what you see in these myths is the elements that will later become the Jesus story.
Let's ask the question, is Jesus developed from pre-existing literary characters? Jesus has certain episodes in this so-called life, and each one of them can be traced to a prior representation of that type.
If you look at the elements which we found in the pagan mystery school myths,
okay, so that was Semiramis and Tammuz.
Dying and resurrecting Son of God, who's born of a virgin, has 12 disciples, turns water into wine at a wedding, he brings a new religion of love, is accused of heresy or of provocation by the authorities, is put to death,
decree,
sometimes by crucifixion.
Doing away
and
of
then
the
if you want to commune
old
with the God-man, you take
laws.
bread and wine, and then you can come to eternal life. Well, all of this is Christianity.
Easter itself is a long pre-Christian celebration of the resurrection of spring from the death of winter.
This is an ancient shamanic rite you'll find all over the world, that you go through a ritual death where you get reborn, but you're reborn as an awake being. So you've died just to your lower nature and woken up to your higher nature.
Okay.
You can find them in the Old Testament, in the Jewish mythology as well. It isn't just pagan parallels. I mean, the New Testament, for example, the Ascension. We have an ascension with the Old Testament figure of Elijah. And it's a very dramatic ascension.
Yeah. Elisha-Elijah cycle. These are two Jewish prophets, one followed on from the other, which have many of the story elements found in Jesus. For example, there is a multiplication of food miracle, there is a raising of the dead miracle, there is a water miracle, there is ultimately an ascension to heaven miracle. Is this fulfillment, or is this simply copying of a useful theme?
You can see where they just used Old Testament characters and scriptures as a blueprint to create this new one.
A lot of the ethics of Christianity actually were around before Christianity. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you is in fact from the Old Testament. Jesus didn't make that up. Many of the other aspects of Christian ethics, many things which we might like to applaud as very good aspects of Christian ethics, can be found in the Stoic philosophy in Rome, which, by the way, was exactly the philosophical and ethical school promoted by the Flavians.
There's little that is original about Jesus. If one separates from his words advice that was in the interest of the Roman imperial family, all that you have left are snippets of widely known philosophies, truisms, and concepts that came directly from prior Hebraic literature.
The reason I am now convinced there's no historical Jesus, which seems a real, like, whoa, to people who are not familiar with the idea, is a combination of things. First of all, there's no evidence for an historical man which stands up to proper scrutiny. Secondly, is the story of Jesus is full of these motifs which come from the pagan mysteries. And the third reason is because in the early Christian movement, there's these two types of Christians, certainly by the 2nd century, which I think of as Gnostics and literalists. What marks out the literalists, who will become the Roman Empire and the Roman Catholic Church, is that they've got an historical man. What marks out the Gnostics is that they see it allegorically, and their great heresy is that Christ didn't come in the flesh. Now, the winners write history, and the history books have been written by the literalists.
And all of the tradition about the Romans trying to torture and suppress Christians, these traditions are correct. They definitely persecuted the messianic, militaristic Christians, and they certainly would have frowned on the Gnostic, independent thinking Christians, but the Roman pacifistic, giving to Caesar what is Caesar Christians, that group would have been promoted.
Which makes it perfect for the Roman Empire. And it's a fascist empire. It's got a very simple message: just believe this, you don't have to transform, and you have to go through the authorities, through the bishops, through the state.
Don't ask any questions.
It's the perfect thing for them to pick up, and that's what they do.
I got you, Paul.
Our scholars agree that the Gospels are complex literary creations, drawing from both pagan and Jewish myths. But Joseph Atwill goes a step further to say that the Flavians wrote passages directly into the Gospels which show that they were the authors.
One of the most famous prophecies that Jesus makes is about the coming of someone he refers to as the Son of Man. Now, many people believe that he's talking about a second coming of himself, and many people believe that this is going to occur some point in the future. Well, the fact is, this coming of Jesus has already occurred. Jesus makes very specific prophecies as to what will happen when the Son of Man makes his visitation. He refers to 3 key events. The Galilean towns will be crushed, Jerusalem will be encircled with a wall, and the temple will be razed, leaving not one stone atop another. He also states exactly when this individual will come. He says that the Son of Man will appear before the generation that is alive and listening to Jesus' words passes away.
Now, to skip ahead,
the Jews of this era, a generation is 40 years.
Be interested in this part.
And so the only individual that could possibly be the Son of Man that Jesus predicts is Titus Flavius. Titus Flavius did destroy the Galilean towns. He did encircle Jerusalem with a wall, and he razed the temple and left not one stone atop another. And he did this within 40 years. Josephus recorded that no matter how Titus tortured the Jews, they refused to call him Lord or God. So to circumvent this stubbornness, the Flavians wrote the Gospels, in which a Son of Man was predicted to come in the future. Titus fulfilled these prophecies and became the Son of Man. So you end up worshiping Titus without knowing it.
To further support his thesis that the Flavians originated Christianity, Joseph Atwill points to the Roman Catholic Church's earliest saints, known as the Christian Flavians.
The Flavian family is connected to early Christianity in a number of unusual ways. So many members of the family were recorded as having been among the first Roman Catholic saints. And these include Flavia Domitilla, who is either Titus's sister or his niece, And there is an inscription honoring Flavia for donating the land that became the first Christian catacomb. And Flavia Domitilla was the first Christian saint. Her son, Clement, is recorded as having been the first Roman Catholic pope after the Apostle Simon. In addition, there were two members of the Flavian household staff, Neros and Achilles. Both of them had churches named after them in the very earliest Christian dioceses in Rome. There was a Christian theologian whose name was Titus Flavius Clemens, Clement of Alexandria. And he's the one who actually described the first Christian symbols. And he said they were the anchor, the boat, the fish, the olive branch, the star. And oddly, these are the very symbols that the Flavian Caesars used on their coins. The final connecting point between the Flavian family and Christianity is that in the 4th century, Flavius Constantine made Christianity the state religion of Rome. The military achievements of Caesars were important to all Romans. So certainly, the Flavian Christians, the group that the Roman Catholic Church states were the first saints of the religion, would have known the identity of the Son of Man that Jesus predicted, who would crush Galilee and circle Jerusalem with a wall and raise the temple, was Titus Flavius.
And that would explain why Constantine
so it seems
made it so
important
them, for him
there are actually
to
many clues
make
pointing
it a state
to the
religion.
Flavian origin of Christianity. And perhaps the most intriguing one that Joseph
told y'all to
uncovered
remember Flavius
is the secret
Constantine.
code the Flavians used in their documents, which enabled him to make his startling discovery.
Here we go.
So the Romans had the Jews' scripture locked up inside their imperial court, and they studied it. And what they discovered was that there was a unique literary code hidden in the text.
This hidden code, which was common in Jewish scripture, was used by the Flavian literary team to place passages into the Gospels that had to be deciphered to be understood. This hidden literary technique is known as typology.
Typology. Here we go, y'all.
Typology is used throughout the ancient Hebraic literature. And it's a genre that is really no longer understood or used today. But simply put, typology is using events from the past to provide form and context for subsequent ones.
What we're talking about is stereotypic. In other words, there's an idealized prototype which shows certain characteristics or performs in certain ways.
For instance, one of the things they do is they take an old story and they retell it in a new form. And they superimpose contemporary history upon old stories. And they create these multi-layered texts.
In Hebraic typology, texts were designed to be read in comparison to one another, or intertextually. And in doing so, a meaning that would not be visible in the surface narration would become apparent to someone who understood the typologic connection between the stories. Hebraic typology connects prophets. Events from the life of one prophet are placed into the life of a subsequent prophet. And this shows that there is a divine pattern established by God connecting his prophets to one another.
The Gospels actually show how we can decipher for ourselves this hidden code or typology that was used to create the Jesus story.
At the very beginning of the Gospels, there's a primer of this typology. What the author of Matthew has done is take events from the Old Testament and place them into the life of Jesus. These events occur in the same sequence in the story of Jesus as they occur in the Old Testament.
Numerous Bible scholars had already identified the following parallels.
Both stories have a patriarch named Joseph who travels from Israel to Egypt, a ruler who massacres innocent boys, a divine character who states that all the men are dead who sought your life, and then a return from Egypt to Israel. This is followed by events which have passing through water. In the Old Testament, the Israelites pass through the Red Sea. In Matthew, Jesus is given a baptism in which he passes through water. We then travel into the wilderness. The Israelites are in the wilderness for 40 years, Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days. Finally, we have the three temptations. In the Old Testament, we have the temptation by bread, the statement, do not tempt God, and the commandment to worship only God. These appear again in Matthew, where Jesus is tempted by bread, tells the devil, do not tempt God, and instructs him to worship only God. Therefore, when you compare the life of Jesus with the life of Moses, you see a linkage that shows that the character in the Gospels was divinely connected to the character in the Old Testament. The life of the first Savior of Israel, Moses, foresaw the life of Jesus, who's now claiming to be the next Savior of Israel.
To understand the rest of the Jesus story, his adult ministry, we simply need to know that the same system of parallel names, locations, and concepts occurring in the same sequence was used to connect Jesus in the Gospels to Titus in the works of Josephus. Our scholars explain this gospel typology in the following three examples.
Boys,
Jesus
good.
comes to the Sea of Galilee at the beginning of his ministry. He gathers his disciples to him and he says, do not be afraid, follow me and become fishers of men. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus actually says catchers of men. Titus comes to the same location, to the Sea of Galilee. He gathers his troops, his disciples, together and he says, don't be afraid. And then he leads them. They follow him and they attack a group of Jewish rebels. They sink the Jews' boats. The Jews attempt to swim to safety and the Romans use their spears to catch them. They become fishers of men.
The match isn't exact, but we should never expect it to be exact. It's simply a type which is repeated across the whole of the New Testament.
Jesus is constantly dealing with devils. Josephus also deals with devils, but Josephus defines who these devils are. He states that the devils are those individuals who have a rebellious spirit and rebel against Rome. At Gadara, Jesus encounters one man who has a legion of demons inside his mind. They then are driven out by Jesus, they infect a herd of swine, and then this herd rushes wildly into the water. This is a parallel to Titus's battle at Gadara, where one individual infects an entire legion of Jews with his demonic spirit, and then that group in turn infects another group, and this combined group is driven by the Romans into the sea.
What's being suggested here is that this story that you find in the Gospels is in some ways sort of like a grim parable about that military event. It's sort of like a bit tongue-in-cheek, I think. The Romans had a vicious sense of humour like this, a very black sense of humour. In a medieval text that I've studied, which is called the Gospel of Barnabas, when you read that story, the way it's presented is in an unsophisticated form, that is to say it's sort of been decoded in some ways, and it becomes clear that what we're talking about here are the Jewish rebels are chased into the sea and they drown in the sea. In the Gospels, these are presented as pigs. This is once again a very dark, black sort of Roman sense of humour. Some of this literature really needs to be understood like that.
In Josephus's biography, he describes when he was in the entourage of Titus during the closing stages of the siege of Jerusalem, he chanced upon three of his friends who were being crucified. And he pleaded with Titus for their release. And Titus gave that permission, and the three figures were removed from the cross. Two of them died, and one revived. Now, if you're looking for a stereotypic example of how some idea was floated into the mind of someone writing the Gospels, that is a pretty clear example. It's certainly a strange occurrence that we find such an incident in the works of Josephus when it shows up in such a dramatic form in the Gospels.
In the Gospels, Joseph of Arimathea asked the Roman commander to take Jesus down from the cross. In Josephus's history, Joseph Bar Matthias asked the Roman commander to take someone down from the cross. Arimathea is a pun on Josephus's last name, Bar Matthias.
When you read our sources really carefully, and you have to do it really, really carefully, because they didn't spell it out for us. It's effectively very well hidden. We have to understand that our literature, a lot of our literature is essentially propaganda. The Romans are not writing objective history, and all of our literature has been through Roman filters. Perhaps that's the significance of the Dead Sea Scrolls, that this is literature that hasn't been through the Roman filters.
It's important to realize that Josephus wrote in an era when allegory was regarded as a science. Educated readers were expected to be able to see another meaning.
Welcome, good sir. How are you?
I am well. You got me up past my bedtime here.
Apologies. I need to get. I need to
No,
get
you're
through
not.
the.
You're not sorry. You're not sorry one bit.
Need to get through the comparisons really quick. And
Oh my gosh! Oh my gosh! I got leg day tomorrow. So.
Oh, not leg day. Bum, 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 bum.
The torture rack. Yeah. So.
Torture.
Now looking forward to that.
Wrong ticker. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Still trying to figure out where that one is. There it is. All right. So. Whew. All right. So, what do you think?
It's a statement. I mean, there's a proverb that talks about. It basically says that something sounds right or seems right until it's challenged, and I think that goes both ways, whether Christianity be challenged or those who challenge Christianity be challenged. So I was looking up the documentary and wanted to see the main guy there, Joseph Atwell. So I was trying to see has this been presented in some sort of forum or presentation to historians or scholars. What I couldn't find it. So, and for me, trust me, I'm not an expert by any means in. I know a little bit, but I'm not as deep as these guys who do this stuff for a living. So I can look at it and I can say, well, yeah, that sounds interesting, and that sounds, something that, that I need to, sort of take into consideration. But again, I don't know, and so, but I was looking for, because really where I tend to flesh out a lot of things is I like seeing high scholarly type of debate. So again, So I'm always looking for stuff like that. I said I couldn't find it. So the folks who are there, I mean, certainly they can come to conclusions. In fact, I even looked at some of the reviews of the movie or the presentation, and even from some mythicists. Probably the most famous one is Bart Ehrman, who used to be scholarly in Christianity, and then he became a skeptic and all those kind of things. He didn't like this presentation much at all, and he's one who he thinks that some of the scholarship was kind of shoddy in what they presented. Now again, I don't know, but I'm just saying I like when you have, if someone's going to make bold claims, that I think it certainly needs to be tested in an audience that site, and from different people, from historians who are not religious, from historians that are religious, from scientists, from whoever. I mean, it's just like anything else. It's like you going for a PhD, you have to present before a body, and if your stuff is incorrect, if they find ours, that they can say, yeah, no, this isn't. Not to say that they agree with your material,
absolutely,
but is it credible? Does it pass credibility? Have you done a process by which you have researched what and came to your conclusions? Now, we may disagree with your conclusions, even though we may agree with your facts. And so when I was watching the video, yes, I agreed with some of the facts that they were stating, particularly around the destruction of the temple and the destruction of Jerusalem, 70 AD, the hiding of the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's why they're so important, because prior to that, the only text that they had after that, I think the Masoretic texts, I think they were written between like 700 and 900 AD. The Dead Sea Scrolls were written like 1,000 years earlier. And then when they compared them together, they say, hey, these are pretty accurate copies, if you will, of the text that we had. And so, so a lot of that's there. I could certainly agree that I think the founding quote unquote of certainly the Roman Catholic Church and that hierarchy or whatnot, again, specious to me. Certainly, and there have been several breaks from that. I mean, the Orthodox Church broke away at some point, the Coptic Church broke away at some point, and then again, you had the Protestant Reformation in the 1500s that also, with Martin Luther and those guys, they broke away from that. So there's always been sort of, divides and schisms and whatnot, and there's been a lot of, mystery and mysticism, certainly around those things that become problematic. And so I don't object to anyone who raises serious concerns, especially when we talk about how Christianity has been used as you've been saying for the past few weeks, as a weaponized to subjugate other people. And we can go through history with that also. I mean, Christian history is messy. I agree with all that. The Inquisitions, all those wars, in the church in Europe, and all those things. Yeah, it's messy stuff. And so for me, like I said, I keep my faith in regard to that. I keep it pretty simple. So again, now if you want to say that the Gospels were written as sort of a pacifist move by the Flavian Christians to kind of subdue or to as a rebuttal of the Jews and their belief in a wartime Messiah, which I also agree with. I think that was the definite, but that was definitely a case that they wanted someone who was going to overthrow Rome. That's how, in their mind, Christ meant that, overthrow Rome. And then so when Jesus says, well, my kingdom is not of this world, they could be like, hey, wait a minute, that's not quite what we quite had in mind. Now, if you want to, now again, is that to say that these folks wrote that for that very reason? I have no idea. And I don't know how these guys could come to that conclusion either. But I'm not opposed or I'm not offended by the claim. But I'm just saying, I would need a little bit more cross-examination by people who know the stuff. It ain't gonna be me. I can say that's an interesting point of view, and like I said, I was looking at just different people, and again, I wanted specifically to look at other critics, other people who may not buy the whole faith thing, but those who would look at this seriously and say, hey, they didn't hit the mark with this presentation. And again, I was just looking at a couple things. I didn't really kind of get deep into it. It's hard to do that in real time as you're playing the video.
Absolutely.
So I may go back and look at some things. Yeah. Some things later on and see, but see if there's some critique that I can get with. But I mean, it's all. But and we've talked about also when it comes to the similarities. We talked about this, I think, first time I came up. We were talking about how the story sounds similar in other ancient religions or what have you. And then I brought up the idea of a singularity in terms of could it be that the story is being told or the story is being discovered by other people that sounds the same, because maybe that is kind of when it's driving towards. And I used a movie example, I think, the last time I was here to kind of illustrate that. Again, I don't know. It could be coincidental or it could be purposeful. But at the end of the day, the question is for anybody, however you interpret the scriptures or however how you go about things, how does that either inform sort of how you move or how you treat others or how you conduct yourself as a human being? And if the way you use it is such that elevates, then I think that's certainly a proper use. And that's how I read it. Throw all the other stuff out. I mean, especially I'm not necessarily, as a Christian, I'm not an Old Testament guy. I kind of tell people that. I kind of say that, look, my Bible really is the New Testament. The only reason for the Old Testament was basically it tells the story of failure. And really the only thing that's really at play is the Messiah, Jesus Christ, came through all of that. And that was really the purpose. In fact, even in the Pauline letter to Galatians, he talks about that. The Old Testament wasn't supposed to be the perfect thing that kept everybody together. And so the idea, but that's what so I recommend that you read Galatians 3. It's not about choosing. A lot of it's about replacing. And Paul talks about in Galatians chapter 3 what the Gospels were, what the Old Testament was for, and what it wasn't supposed to be. So again, if you read Galatians 3, it kind of gives you that layout. So when Paul talks about, for example, God made a promise to Abraham that I will bless your seed and make your descendants as numerous as the sand. He wasn't talking about the state of Israel. He was talking about those who were Christ's followers. The seed was Jesus, and then those who follow Jesus are the seed, are the people. So it wasn't, you know, so again, that clarity that was made for me, again, makes for me the Old Testament less important or relevant. And when I tell people, you know, turn to how to look at it, my thing is this: where the Old Testament and New Testament agree. So thou shalt not murder. They both kind of line up. But if it says in the Old Testament you shouldn't eat shellfish, and the New Testament says you can basically eat anything you want, I'm going with the New Testament. Because again, all those rules, Levitical laws, and all those things that those people were doing, that's not for me. And that stuff really didn't make you right with God or anything like that. But what it did do, what all that stuff did, it created a culture. And so with that culture, it preserved a people up to a certain time. So now as a Christ follower, when Christ came, a lot of that stuff, he's like, that really doesn't get you home. That's why, again, so I don't follow a lot of that stuff. So, but it's relevant. I mean, there's lessons to be gleaned from it, especially when you look at Proverbs. You know, I read Proverbs. I mean, look, any positive motivational book that I've ever read, you can go back to Proverbs and it says the same thing. So it's not that there's things that can't be gleaned from it. It's not to say that there's not wisdom in it or practical things that you can use in your life, but it's not, it doesn't, you know, if there wasn't an Old Testament, that still doesn't mean that I couldn't, you know, have a faith or belief or go about conducting things. So, you know, so like I said, you know, the presentation I thought was interesting. The only thing I would say, and even encourage in the future, and again, me, I know very little, but a critique, or if you can point people to where there's scholarly debate. I know that guy I said, Bart Ehrman, I know he debates Christian scholars all the time. And there's several, look up Bart Ehrman. He goes with William Lane Craig. He's a Christian philosopher and historian. They've had several debates over the past over series. Is Jesus historical? Is he a real figure? And they have a debate about that. Again, Bart doesn't believe at this point that, you know, there's really not a lot of proof that Jesus was a historical figure. But the same guy said this presentation kind of got it wrong. It was kind of sloppy in this presentation. So again, I would like to hear more of that from his perspective. Why was it, you know, why do you feel that way about it? But again, he's not an insider or somebody who has an interest in wanting to keep the quote unquote mythology going. And so that's, you know, so that's kind of where I kind of find, what is faith?
So,
I would like to know her definition of that, if she can specify what that is. But go ahead.
So when you say, when you're referring to someone saying that they're not an insider, are you saying that they're not someone who is applying the faith? No, let me re-ask the question. Are you saying that they're not someone who's looking at it objectively without applying Christianity to the reasoning?
What I'm saying is he's not, in short, he's either not a believer or he's lost faith.
Thank you.
So
okay.
he doesn't have an interest in saying, yeah, Christianity's real and whatnot. So he's not trying to load it. I mean, so right. he's kind of looking at it. Look, I'm a scientist and I don't see enough objective. Now, again, when you talk about these ancient history or ancient historical figures,
right?
There's a lot of people who we accept as historical, and we may not have everything on them, but we just accept it as this is a historical figure because that's the story that's been passed on. So I don't know if in terms of how you judge antiquity or ancient figures, I'm not sure if, obviously if there was a tomb, that'd be easy. But again, the whole story is he's not in the tomb anymore. Now, if you could find the original tomb he was in, that'd be another story. Or again, if there were, they didn't have pictures, there's a lot of things that are okay.
So, substance of things. Okay.
All right. Now that's a quote, but that doesn't define it.
So for me, it's the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen.
Okay. That's a statement. And again, I've heard that all my life. That's a statement, but it doesn't really define it. What faith is. And that comes from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4. You actually have to go to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 10. I think that's more representative of what faith is.
What I said, or what she said.
What
she said.
No, what I'm saying, what you said. I thought what you said and what she said is basically the same thing.
No, for me, I said the substance is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen.
Yeah, and that's a quote from Hebrews chapter 11, verse 4.
That's what I said. Yeah, I believe that. I believe that's directly the quote. I do believe. She's saying the substance of things we hope.
Sorry. Let me just.
For it, even if we can't see it in a fast answer-ish way.
Actually, it's actually Hebrews 11 verse. What you're quoting is Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1. What I was referring to. I'm sorry, it's verse 6. That's right. So what you're quoting is Hebrews chapter 11 verse 1. But I'm going to verse. I use verse 6 more so than verse 1. So that's how I define faith. Faith is predicated on those two things. At least if you talk about Christian faith, anyway, it's believing that there is a God or that He is, and that He rewards those who just diligently seek after Him through whatever means they seek after Him.
Okay, so that's faith in Him, but the absolute concept of faith.
To an extent,
yeah.
To an extent, but it's not. But it's not belief in. It's not so absolute that you don't have any basis for it.
Correct.
I'm saying I'm just going to believe this regardless of not. Faith is also built on facts and based on information. Like for example, what you just played tonight.
Okay.
Someone can either have faith in what is being said or what is not. You're either gonna, you could do your research. Okay. Either you take it on face value, or you look up the information and say, that makes sense. So that was correct, and then you decide to make an educated decision to believe in or have faith in what they're presenting. But again, faith is not necessarily because you lack evidence. And even in the scriptures, when Paul talks about. In fact, he talks about this, like, how do you know that there is a God? Romans 1, 2, and 3, he talks about that. Romans 1, he talks about, how do you know there's a God? Just look at the creation. Look how things move. If you think that kind of came by accident or whatever, look at that. Romans 2, he talks about this idea of conscience. And this is why I've always believed that you don't have to be a Christian or faith of anything to have morals. I think atheists are some of the most moral people that I know. But if you define morals as a sense of right and wrong,
okay,
that comes from something it's in you. You know it's wrong to do certain things.
A sense of conviction or contrition.
Correct. So that's another way. And so he says, well, God imparts that into every person. And then the third, the ultimate revelation he's saying is Jesus Christ himself. So through the creation, through conscience, and through the ultimate revelation, which is Christ himself. At least that's how he defines. So, but he doesn't say just don't believe in anything. He's saying, like, look out there and see the stars and see how everything's aligned and see the, see the science and see that there is and see that there's something more than just saying, okay, I'm just going to arbitrarily believe that. And so faith does not mean just throwing your logic out the window. Now, at some point, you're going to have to say, look, I may not know everything, or some of the stuff still may not make sense, but it's enough. It's just like how a person has faith in us. How does your wife have faith in you? Well, you and her. There's things that you have presented.
Yeah.
Or have demonstrated.
Right.
That says, like, yep, I can trust him. Or that you say, I can trust her. Who are you asking?
Yeah. Thanks.
If you ask me, yes, I am. Yes. But it's weird though, like in recent years, I've had trouble with the term because again, it's so broad. It's like, I would rather people ask me what I believed rather than what I am. Because if you say Christian, that's 256 flavors. That's, beliefs. Am I a Trump supporter? Am I this? Am I that? Am I whatever? I would rather just have a conversation, or I can just give you even my own personal testimony. How'd I become whatever it is that you call me? I would rather have that. And ultimately how I became that, I can't really explain to you because it was a conviction. You know what I'm saying? Like I was in a situation where, it was heard, and I was basically, at the time I accepted Christ, I was a dedicated agnostic.
Oh, interesting.
Wasn't trying to go to church. I wasn't raised in church. The experience that I had in church was not the most positive. I went to, my mom, who was having her own mental issues and whatnot, and that kind of mix of, yes, I do. Yes. But she had her problems, but she would take me to churches and things like that. And I would see when, I'm 5, 6, 7 years old, I'm seeing people falling out. I'm seeing preachers jumping off the pulpit. I'm seeing all this crazy stuff. It wasn't like, something that I had a particular thing. And then her just seeing what she was doing. And again, her mental illness was kind of meshed with her Christianity. So Jesus was talking to her all the time. God told me this. And you get to a point where I don't think God told you that. So again, it was just a lot of that stuff going on. But I came to a point in my life where I started contemplating my life. I had a near death experience. And I started contemplating my life and what things really meant. So I wanted to kind of start. So I asked my sister, just bring me a Bible. I just want to, I never asked for it. I never owned one. I was like, I just asked. And that just kind of led me on a journey. And it came to a point where I heard the message and I was like convicted. Like I didn't want to do it. And I can't explain that to anybody what that was, but it was like, I felt like, remember those videos where a guy gets arrested? Like he's in a building and they bring him out. And a lot of times they put like a coat over him because he doesn't want to be seen or whatever. He's walking away in handcuffs or whatever. And he doesn't want to be seen. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what it was. I didn't have that joyous Jesus experience where tears were coming down my face and I just had the joy of the Lord in me. I didn't have that. But it was something that I knew like I couldn't walk away from it. And that, again, I don't try to explain to anybody that, and I don't need, I don't require someone explain that to me. If you say you're a Christian, I take your word for it.
Yeah.
But conviction and belief and things like that's an area I can't judge. I can't judge that. Only my view is only God can judge that at the end of the day, whether or not your belief was sincere or not. But that's what it was for me. And then it was like, okay, well, what do I do from here? And then I had some good brothers who kind of grounded me a little bit, helped me understand the scriptures a little bit more and kind of helped me get settled in because I was kind of freaking out because, I had this Christian experience. Yeah, I'm Christian now, but I see that lady walking down the street, and man, her booty's big, man. Wait a minute. I'm not supposed to think that anymore. I'm supposed to be saved and righteous and all that, and I'm still like, them urges are still there, man. So
you're still a man.
Yeah, man. I'm like, man, what's going on here? It's like, wait a minute, I'm supposed to be this, And guys just kind of, helped to ground me a little bit. So I had some church brothers who, sat down with me and did that for me, and it's just been a growth ever since. So that's as minimal as I keep it. But as far as when it comes to politics, when it comes to governing, when it comes to imposition, I don't roll like that. I think for me, Jesus has been a transformational, or becoming Christ has been a transformational experience for me. And I think it certainly helped me, and I've seen it how it's helped other people. And so that's kind of where I leave it. All the other stuff, 'cause even in the scholarly areas, I kind of walk away from it because it's like, if it's about your belief in your confession, what you truly believe and what you confess, if that's basically your gateway in, all this other stuff, it's interesting, history and scripts and manuscripts and what's the significance of the Lord's Supper and imputation and all this kind of stuff. Yeah, that stuff is interesting. But I'm like, how does this help anybody? And now what you start to see is, and we've seen it in a lot of these spaces, it's like, unless you believe with a certain political philosophy, people are starting to judge whether you're Christian or not. I think there's Christian Democrats. I think there's Christian Republicans. I think there's all kinds of people across the spectrum. But he said, if you believe this, then you're not one of them. I'm like, where's that? It's not stated anywhere.
Correct. And
so, for a lot of, and I've seen, especially in this last political cycle, I saw a lot of that where people were being attacked
for simply not either for simply not believing or believing in the same way.
Yeah. And I think the tent is big.
Of course,
it's bigger than what we want, but it's the humanity. And I think if I was to agree with one thing in the video, humanity has always had an agenda to conquer, to subjugate, to make sane, to control. And so as long as that's sort of intermixed in it, you will always have, but again, it was even in the Bible, it was in the book of Acts. Factions started in Christianity very early. And that was always something that had to be dealt with. I mean, you had the Jewish Christians thinking, okay, well, you got to be circumcised. You got to do all this. You got to live like a Jew, basically.
Yeah, that was in Leviticus.
Yeah, the Levitical laws, right? That even as a Christian, you still had to keep and maintain the Levitical laws.
Well, so that's the part that I wanted to touch on whenever you mentioned the I want to say the inculcation or the excommunication of the Old Testament portion. And okay, watch this really quick.
Problem with pastors preaching and talking about prosperity?
Yes.
Why is that? I mean, some people would say we want to get out of that situation, right? Poor, not having. So if somebody, but you understand where I'm going.
I understand where you're going.
So what's the problem with preaching prosperity?
First and foremost, one should ask, who's the one that prospered from the message? It's never the people. It's always the preacher.
That's deep.
They buy his cars. They pay his rent. They buy his houses. They buy his planes. They buy his yacht. The people don't prosper. The preachers put the people on a guilt trip. And they make it
just like psychology.
That's all it is. It's religious psychology, religious propaganda. And they put the people on such a guilt trip and make them believe if you don't give an X amount of money, you won't be blessed of God, or God won't bless you. I don't want to serve a God that if I don't have no money, he can't do nothing criminal.
Now, the reason why I pulled that last part is the Old Testament God, if you will. If I had to split the two, the Old Testament God did a lot of requiring of something in order for you to get something. Especially in the Levitical portion of the Bible, it was a lot of, and reading through it, it was a lot of, even if you did one of the new commandments, because there was a 10 commandments in Exodus, right? And then of course there was some follow-up commandments after Exodus. I think it was Exodus 10, Exodus 20, I think it is. There were some follow-up ones, but then when you get to Leviticus, man, it gets real, right? And then it says, starting in Leviticus, it says that even if you were to commit these commandments inadvertently or unwittingly, right? And it's found out about, you have to like get a certain cow or a certain lamb.
Right, you made a sacrifice, but there were 7 types of offerings: burnt offering, sin offering, wave offering.
Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's like, but that entire part was for the Hebrews, for those specific people.
Correct.
Not for the entirety of the rest of the people who might actually believe in the faith. It was correct. Those people, correct, the Levites specifically,
correct.
Okay, so
the Jews, the Jewish people, it was for all
Hebrew
the Levites were essentially the governmental ruling class of the Jewish nation. Yeah, the tribe of Levi, and the priests were specifically the sons of Aaron.
Right, but everyone that was under that tribal. That tribe, for instance, and the whole.
No, it was the entire nation of Israel was under Levitical law. The Levites were the enforcers of that law. They were your judges. Right. They were your weights and measures. So again, they were your Department of Commerce. They maintained religious order. They also served and assisted in the religious services that were done by the priests. Who again, the priests were the sons of Aaron, who was also a Levite.
Yes. Okay.
So again, they were essentially your government.
Right.
And they were the ones who you paid your tithes and offerings to. Yes. Because they did not have all the other 11 other tribes. They had land.
Agreed.
But the Levites were dedicated solely to service to the public. So again, imagine like our government. We have a federal government that employees that run the nation, essentially. Your Department of Education, your Department of Defense, your Department of Agriculture, they were the heads of that. So because they didn't have an inheritance of the land, your tithes went to them.
Right, I got
because
that.
They didn't have any inheritance of the land. So again, basically your tithes in the Old Testament were your taxes. So just like we pay taxes now to our government, for them to carry out the functions of government, it was very similar with how all of the Jewish people, except for the tribe of Levi and the Levites, they were paid 10% of your produce and your agriculture and your livestock.
Right.
From the land, and that's how they were taken care of, because their full-time work was serving
the temple,
the people, serving God and serving the people. They were like your government employees.
So you're saying that the Levitical law, where it's basically saying all these penance that you had to do, basically, that didn't cover the entire Israel, children of Israel. It was only for the Levites.
Some of it was to God directly. So the burnt offering, you took a slaughtered a calf, you put it on the altar and burnt it up. That was to God. Fresh aroma, sweet and smelling to God.
Well, yeah.
Everything else went to the Levites.
Okay, maybe I'm not asking my question correctly. Let me try again. What I'm saying is the commandments themselves. The commandments were levied upon the entirety of Israel.
Correct.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. Those rules were for the people of Israel.
Correct.
Okay, not for the entirety of the entire world of people who might believe in the faith later on down the line. Is what I'm trying to say.
Correct.
Okay, so people like a Mr. Bennett, who may later become Christian, which this faith, the faith that these laws were attributed to, is not Christian.
No.
This is Jewish faith. What I'm looking at right here, which is the Pentateuch or the Hebrew Bible, which is what the Torah is, which is essentially what the Old Testament is not for Christianity.
No. The only like I said, there's a rule that I apply to say, okay, if you want to apply some of the Old Testament to Christianity, the only ones you could possibly even think of are the commandments.
Tanakh. Excuse me, but go ahead. No, it's right.
With the exception
go ahead.
of the Sabbath, because again, the Sabbath was like, you shouldn't do any work on the Sabbath at all.
Well,
and Jesus said, look, if you can do good on the Sabbath, go ahead. If you truly want to observe the Sabbath, then if you work in a hospital, you have to turn all the machines off, or you couldn't maintain any machines in the hospital. God forbid if there's a fire,
Mr. Bennett,
or a police matter where you need a police officer.
Well, I'm going to push back on you just a little bit now. The Sabbath is part of the Pentateuch, and it's part of a Tanakh. So if we're going to say that this is part of the rabbinic tradition and not applicable to Christianity, then it would make sense as to why, I don't know, the Roman Catholic Church felt as though it was just okay to change the Sabbath day all willy-nilly and shit. Do you see what I'm saying? Because it technically didn't apply to what Christianity was. But then I'm kind of shooting myself in the foot there, because they knew that Christianity was indeed a subsect of Judaism, or Judaism, if you will, because it took from and derived from rabbinic Judaism and just Judaism itself. They bastardized it in a sense. If you let the historical context and historical documents and what they did as far as the Roman Catholic Church speak for itself, they basically took from the Pentateuch, and basically said, we're going to take, imagine being Jew in Rome at that point in time, and your Sabbath day was Saturday. And it said, screw it, we're going to change your Sabbath day. And if you are, what did they call it? Sabathing at that point in time. I'm getting the word wrong.
No, I understand. I understand the change from Saturday to Sunday. Again, that was certainly something that the early church decided to do.
Then you're an anathema.
But the overarching point is that, and again, Paul talks about this in his letters. The days don't matter. It's all about context. If you decide you want to take your Sabbath, if you want to take a Sabbath at all, he says in Rome. Look at Romans 14. Okay. He says some people you think every day is the same. Some people you think certain days are special.
Okay. All right.
It really doesn't matter.
You said go to Romans 14.
If you think Romans 14, or you can also go to Titus. I think Titus 2. He also talks about.
Does he specifically say Sabbath?
Here you got to go to Titus 2 for that.
Oh, Titus.
I think Titus chapter 2.
Titus is New Testament, but it's towards the end of the Bible, right? Yep.
Yeah.
Boy, I remember my sword. Titus what? Titus 2?
Titus 2. I believe it's Titus 2, if not Titus 1. Keep going down. Keep going. Is that it?
That's the end.
Then it might be. I might be getting it wrong. Hang on. No. Hang on.
Do you mean do a whole search?
No, I got mine up here too. So I may have my chapters wrong, which happens from time to time. I'm sorry. It's Colossians 2. My bad.
Oh.
Colossians 2. My bad. Colossians 2. Go down midway. Yeah. 16. Yeah, so he kind of starts a whole from 16 to 23. He talks about this idea that they have people who present themselves with a lot of their religiosity, observing festivals, observing holidays, not touching certain things, not eating certain things. None of that stuff matters for a Christian. So it says, let no man. So 16 said, you had it.
I know. Hang on. 1 second. 1 second. Parallel view. I'm curious about something. 16:11. Go. Oh, on the 16:11 view, you're not going to see any U's. It's a very difficult read.
Mm-hmm.
All right. You said right here. Okay.
So let no man therefore judge whether you eat meat or not, because there were people who was like you shouldn't eat meat, and some people said you should only eat vegetables, or what you drink. Again, some people said you should absolutely abstain from wine or alcohol. There's no prohibitions against that.
Let no man beguile you, basically seduce you of your reward or trick you of your reward in your voluntary humility and worshiping of angels. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
Puffed up, like I said, it's just puffed up religiosity. But
Okay,
at the end of
pause.
the day, it doesn't mean anything.
Okay, why would anyone be worshiping angels?
Well, you shouldn't. But I think what he's saying here is that you do have people who may be pushing angel or angelic worship. So again, I mean, there's things that people will put in, and that's been the thing with religion all the time. It's like God can make it like very simple. Jesus made it very simple. The two greatest commandments: love God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. If you do those two things, you cover on everything. All this other religiosity is meaningless. But people will judge you based on whether or not you keep all these additional ordinances. And that's to me, again, that's the point. That's where I think things get out of pocket. That's where religion starts to creep in. If your religion does not make you a better person, a kinder person, a more merciful person, a more humble person before God and before men, then your religion is meaningless. And it doesn't matter if you said, you know what, I'm a Christian, I refuse to eat animals. It's not going to save you one way or the other.
Or if
you're Jewish, now you're not supposed to eat pork. No bacon. But it doesn't matter. Bacon is, or whatever you eat, is going to go into your stomach and is going to get digested. It's not going to have any difference on your faith. So again, people, but this is the problem. This here, what he's doing, he's going against religion.
He is.
And this is what religion does. It adds on more stuff than what needs to be. It doesn't allow people to express themselves based on their conscience, based on their culture, where they come from. Religion always tries to homogenize and to control. And so that is the problem. And so when people critique or criticize Christianity, I get it. Because there's a lot of things in Christianity that have nothing to do with your love or devotion to God or to your service to your fellow man. And if your Christianity is something else other than that, then you're dealing with something that is destructive, that causes wars, it causes strifes, it causes separations, it causes disagreements. And none of that stuff should matter. But I see this on all levels. And so again, so I keep my faith very simplified. And I think that's what Paul is trying to get people to do. But throughout his entire, if you read the book of Acts, his whole time, he was dealing with this stuff all the time.
Now
and people people being two-faced about Peter. He'd be like, when Peter was with the Jewish people, he'd be like very pious. I'm a Jewish guy. And then he hang out with the Gentiles. He'd be like, you know, chilling. And then if the Jews came around, then he became pious again. Paul had to call him out. It's like, look, why are you faking the funk here? Why you trying to be somebody who you're not, or you trying to get people to be who they're not supposed to be? And even at the end of the Acts 15, it was decided. They said to everybody, like, look, we don't want to put any extra burdens on you or whatever. The only thing we're going to ask of you. So again, they came to a compromise. The only thing we're going to ask you to do is, one, don't eat meat sacrificed to an idol, even though Paul says there's nothing wrong if you eat meat sacrificed to an idol, because an idol is nothing. There's only one God. So you may think you'd be eating to another God. There is no other God. But just to maintain the peace, don't eat meat sacrificed to an idol, and stay away from sexual immorality. That's why Paul said, get married, have your wife, do what you want. That's it. All that Levitical law, all that stuff, can't eat shellfish, can't work on the Sabbath, can't do, all that stuff is gone. But everybody is always trying to make you look a certain way, talk a certain way, dress a certain way, control the guy who you played. So, the previous video with Geno Jennings.
Yeah. You
think the Nation of Islam is strict? His church, and it's not just one church. It's a group of holiness Pentecostal churches. I have their bylaws. I downloaded them. They are very, very strict.
Very strict
on how a man looks, how he dresses, the clothing that he wears, the things he can do and cannot do. You cannot own a gun. Not only can you not own a gun, you can't work in a place that sells guns. You cannot work in a place where you have to carry a gun, even if it's in the car. All this stuff is laid out. It is thick. All this stuff that has nothing to do. You come to his church in a pastel suit? We don't do that here.
A pastel suit?
You can't. Against the bylaws. Your hair has to be short. So again, that bun that you have up there, it looks cool to me. You look dope to me.
I can't do that.
You can't now. If you want to be a member of our church, you're gonna have to cut that off.
Oh, I can't do
those
that.
Fingernails that you have on, those tips. Tips.
Yeah, those don't.
No, they got to go. I'm sorry. I'm like, what does it matter? It does not matter. So again, I am, so I keep the religion stuff down, but every denomination that I know of, some are freer than others, some looser than others. Some say come as you are. Some people say black suit, white tie. White shirt, black tie. Everybody, women, skirts only, can't wear pants. Oh, in his church, you can't wear pants as a woman. And must be below the knee. Yeah, those folks are strict. So again, you can do all that stuff. Doesn't draw you closer to God. And so again, like I said, so when I watch things like what you present, whether I agree with it or not, I can understand why people may have some reservation when you look at how Christianity has been used and abused over the years as a religious tool to control people, which I'm absolutely against. And that's why I agree with you I think the country needs to be secular. I do not want a state religion.
Right.
But at the same time, you have to have something. I mean, you have to have a set of rules or some norms that people can rock with. And laws are essentially legislated morality, right? How does something become a law, right? It starts with a moral conviction. You think something should be or should not be, and then you do the work to legislate or to make it a law and to enact it into law. But it starts with a moral conviction.
And
so
some
I think
sort
as a
of
country,
common understanding.
Correct. But right. And that's the thing. You have to have a common set of laws for which everybody can rock with. Now, whether that comes from your God or wherever it comes from, you got to rock with it. But I would contend that at the center of Christianity, those 2 commandments that Jesus talks about covers most of it. If I love my neighbor as myself, I'm not going to lie or blaspheme their name. I'm not going to slander them or libel about them by writing bad things about them. I'm not going to sleep with your wife. I'm not going to steal from you. Those are good things. But again, the Sabbath stuff, we if you decide to take the Sabbath off and just chill on Sunday, that's up to you. Some people got to work. Look, I'm a firefighter. I'm a doctor. I got to work on Sunday. What do you want? But I've gotten into debates with people in my church about, no, you shouldn't do anything on Sunday. Okay, well, don't get sick. Like I said, if you go to the hospital, because according to the Levitical law that you want to cite, you can't even turn the light switch on.
Yeah.
So if your heart is starting to give out, you got to go in and adjust that machine or whatever. Sorry, I can't.
You're screwed.
You're screwed. You're done. You're done. So again, it doesn't make sense. Oh, and how did you get to church anyway? Oh, you drove to church? Oh, you're not
That's
supposed
working.
to drive. That's working a machine. You can't do that either.
Heck, you're paying money on Sunday, and that pastor is definitely working. I find what you've presented. I'm gonna dissect this. I find this relatively interesting that this is essentially saying, just mind your business and just have faith and
at the end of the day, the only question is going to be asked of you, at least in my belief system. Did you believe in me or not? Did you trust me or not? And did you bear fruit in my name? I'm the one who's going to be held accountable. So yeah, I can only worry about me and maybe those who are closest to me. Yeah, so my wife, my kids, those who I have influence over, those I have friendships with. If the opportunity presents itself, yeah, I may share the gospel with you, or at least tell them my story. If you get inspired by that or whatever, even, in my belief system, I can't save anybody anyway. Like I said, when I got saved, that was a conviction. It wasn't like something that said, okay, this is a good idea. I think I'll do it. I did not want to do it. I'm literally walking down the aisle and I'm like, man, I'm screwed. But I was compelled. I can't explain it any more than that. And so that was my experience. Yours or anybody else's, I can't get into that space. That's not my business. How God deals with you, that's your business. So yeah, so a lot of it is a sort of a mind your business sort of thing, but my goal is to be salt and light in the world. That if there's anything in me that people find noteworthy or virtuous or what have you, if people talk to me and say, hey, you seem to be, cool guy, grounded and whatnot, I'll tell them.
Right.
Now you take it and rock with it however you want to. If the Holy Spirit decides to convict you and compel you to accept the faith, then I'll be there. I'll be right there with you. If you don't, I'll see you next time. So so again, forcing people, I never liked, even in church, people, and I'm sure you saw this too. Like, they do the altar call. Someone's going to go and just grab somebody.
And
just bring them down to the altar. It's like, no, absolutely not. If they don't want to come, if they don't have that conviction on their heart to come on their own,
then no.
Then no.
And this flies in the face of the overpowering of over judgment, over concern of what someone else is doing, what someone isn't doing. And I think it's an over sense of, and I think it even says it here. This puffed up sense of needing to see me inflated.
Or prove that I'm more Christian than you are, or I'm more religious or holier than you, or no, I'm as transparent as I can be. I'm a human being, but I believe in God. I believe in the God of the Bible, or specifically in the God of Jesus Christ. Whether you want to see this, it's made up, it's not written, it's made by the Flavians and all that. Whatever you want to believe, I believe in that. I trust in that. And to the point where if someone put a gun to my head, I would say, yeah, I believe this stuff. If they said, look, you either believe or you die, I'm dying. Hit me with the bullet.
Right.
Yeah, so that, you're not gonna move me necessarily on that. But I'm not imposing that on anybody. Like I said, it's not my job. Holy Spirit comes and convicts. You can either reject it or you don't, and move on. I'm still your friend. I'm still however I treat you. Whether again, I got friends who are atheists, agnostics, Muslims, Jew. It's across the board. That doesn't mean I can't be friends with you. If anything, it's the other way around. I want to be the best friend you I possibly can.
Absolutely.
And if my salt and light, if you can see, if you say, well, if your God makes you this type of person, then yeah, even when it came to, Paul talks about if you are, let's say, if neither one of you believers, right, but one becomes a believer, you're supposed to stay with that person because hopefully they'll see a transformed life. So if you were hell before, and now Jesus made you, if you were a bad wife before, and now you become this loving, caring, kinder wife, your husband be like, oh, what happened to you? Oh, well, maybe I should look into that too, or vice versa. But again, you're supposed to be an example as best as you can be. But again, recognize that again, I'm human just like you. I got no magic. I got no special powers. I don't have any insights.
Right.
I learn just like everybody else. I'm always a student. I read as I give understanding. That's all I can do. I'm not the biggest prayer. In fact, I was teaching on Sunday and was talking about prayer, about Jesus, when Jesus talked about the Lord's Prayer. And basically my takeaway was like, look, anybody can pray. People talk about being a prayer warrior and yelling and screaming and speaking in tongues and all this kind of stuff. It's like, look,
it specifically says not to be a someone who prays for what does it say? Jesus.
But again, praying on the street corners, being loud, playing to be seen publicly.
That's correct.
Go into your prayer closet and pray. Also, don't use vain repetitions when you pray. It's not a performance.
Praying in large crowds. Yeah, I've read that somewhere.
Yeah, it's in Matthew. I think it's Matthew. I want to say Matthew 16 or Matthew 13. I forget.
Yeah.
I think it's Matthew 13. But again, the idea is, again, prayer is not for spectacle.
There we go.
And anybody can pray. Anybody. So again, I'm all for praying for you. If you wanted me to pray for you over everything, I would do it for you, and I would do it gladly. But I'm always telling people you can pray for yourself. Because God is, God listens to everybody. God's available to you. So again, you don't have to be intimidated by this person who can pray for an hour. Great. But God's available to you.
It actually says don't make long prayer.
Yeah.
It specifically says that.
But people just go on for it's like, oh my gosh. It's like, you're just reaching. And it can be done anywhere. Thank you. But people just reach. And I'm like, But then people get impressed. It's like, wow, that person really has prayed. That person, hey, can you send a prayer up to God? It's like, wait a minute. If you have a relationship with God, you can pray too. He'll hear you. So so again, my thing is about empowering people to have a personal relationship with God in the fashion that he makes it with you. We all come from different backgrounds, different experiences, different cultures or whatever. My God is available to anybody. You don't have to be like me, sound like me, pray like me, talk like me, act like me. And this is to me is what's missing. It's just a lot of debating and a lot of shouting and a lot of, again, the political stuff and all these issues that have not. Can women be preachers or not? I don't know. People say, oh, women be silent in churches or whatever. But again, you talk about a time when you didn't even have a full Bible yet. A woman can read a Bible now. I mean, 1500s printing press came out. Again, you can read and study and show yourself approved. And if you're studying and showing yourself approved, if something's being taught that is wrong, guess what? If you're reading too, then you can check that.
I mean, hell, that was a point. There was a point in time where lay people couldn't actually read the Bible.
No. In fact, Catholics now, you go to most Catholic churches don't have Bibles in them. They have these homilies and little booklets and whatnot. But they don't have Bibles in there.
No, they don't.
Because again, because that work was it was like the almost mystical, right? Only those who had special privileges or access to it.
Correct.
But the Gutenberg press made the Bible available to anybody. Now it's available in I got every version of the Bible I can think of on my phone, on my app. I got 20-something versions of it.
Yeah.
So this isn't secret knowledge anymore. And yeah, we can read just like any book that we read. If we were in a book club, we're gonna read a book. Yeah, there's gonna be stuff that we read. You may get a totally different understanding of what was read than I do. But then that's when we talk about it. Hey, I got from that book, I got this message. And I got, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I didn't see that. Let me go back and read that. Oh yeah, that's good. That's exchange. That's dialogue. That's iron sharpening iron. There's nothing wrong with that. But you come to a point where no, this is what the book meant. This is what the book meant, and that's it. That settles it. And if you don't believe it, then you're a heretic. I don't have time for that. So listen, I have to run. Certainly I appreciate what you're trying to do. I recognize that not everyone's going to take what you've been presenting in the right way. I get that. And like I said, I disagree with some of the content. And like I said, I also looked at other people who also disagree with it. But that's called having a healthy dialogue.
Sure. Absolutely.
And so, for those who believe, again, I'm a believer. I'll go to my grave with that. But again, I think that even the church or Christianity itself is not above critique and criticism.
Certainly.
There have been a lot of things that have been done, especially we African Americans, so we know how it was done to us in this country. Slaves obey your masters. We all understand that.
Are you sure about that?
I think so. I'm pretty sure.
Are you sure about that?
But again, I think this is health, because again, if we're ever going to get to a point of, I guess, of respect, I think you have to be. Being an infidel. Yeah. I think we have to be open and say, that was messed up. Now, some people want to do plausible deniability. I've seen that a lot also. They say, well, those folks weren't Christian, so I'm good. That's an easy out to say, look, they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing, so they weren't Christian, so I'm not taking that. That's easy. But again, we have to, you got to be honest that, things have been done that should not have been done. And even now with how certain churches operate and how they do things, is that the right way of going about it? Whether you be Geno Jennings or whether you be the Roman Catholic Church or some other church, or, pick your church or whatever. But I just try to, as I understand it, I give my point of view. and it's for you to chew on or what have you, and maybe somebody else will take it on. Paul talks about, someone plants, another one waters, but ultimately it's God who gives the increase. So that's just how I move. And I just made a decision, especially after this last year. I'm staying out a lot of, when you start to mix religion and politics together, I'm out of the conversation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, starting out was the idea that Trump is a savior of some sort, or
that's how they treat him. I mean, I've seen some of these folks and how they look at him, like he's some people compared him to King Darius from the Old Testament. He's the guy. He was the Persian king that basically preserved the Jews in their exile after the Babylonians took them over. So yeah, all kinds of descriptions have been done and whatnot. But again, the hypocrisy. When Clinton did his stuff or whatever, then it was like, oh no, he's not one. But Trump, so again, it just exposes what I think needs to be exposed. And so again, I mostly stay out of it now. You want to talk to me anything substantive about, Christian living or understanding about things, sure, I'm willing to have that conversation. If you ask me personally what I believe about something, I'll tell you. But the debates, I even told sermons like leave me out of the debates. I'm done. It's just not. It's not a fruitful. And one thing that really there was a scripture that it's just been in my conviction as of late. I believe it's Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26, talking about.
Oh yeah, there is a Beyonce. I think there's a Beyonce cult church. There is, yes.
Yeah, so it's like you basically just staying away from godly conversation. That have conversation that builds, that uplifts, and just leave all the other stuff there. I was like, I've been in a lot of wars or whatnot, and I was like, I'm too old. I'm 55. I'm too old for this now.
Too old for this.
I'm too old. Yeah, I'm like Danny Glover from the Lethal Weapon franchise. I'm getting too old for this, man.
This is for you young folk.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with it. But listen, I got to run. I don't know if you're going to keep the show going, but again, appreciate your efforts, and hopefully I was able to add some other perspective to it. I'll continue to look into something. If I find something worthwhile, I'll share with you. But let's just keep the conversation going, and hopefully some people will benefit from it.
Absolutely. As always, sir, I appreciate you. Thanks for stopping by.
Appreciate you also. You have a great night.
All right. You too.
All right. Later.
As always, appreciate you, Mr. Bennett, for a meaningful conversation and the ability to have a objective point of view and be able to add some stuff to it. Certainly, many people may not be able to take whatever I present, as he mentioned, present very well. Some will take it and offer some critical thoughts. Some will walk away from it. Some won't even actually, come face to face with it, and some will just run away from it altogether. My overall goal with it, if I had to summarize, is basically to present a thought-provoking to the overall conversation. To those individuals, respectfully, to those individuals who wish to use the religion as a weaponized, as a weapon to control, to judge, which is the opposite of Colossians 2, but to control, to judge, to demonize, to essentially pitchfork people into a corner, essentially. I'm targeting those individuals. If you want to destroy people's lives, essentially, or essentially form people's lives to the way your liking is, then I will take that book and I will completely eviscerate it, page by page. I will take the religion and I will completely reform it. in the most disrespectful way. To those who want to have a conversation, a theological conversation, and maybe have a different point of view, a different perspective, and actually have a theological conversation like Mr. Bennett. Those people I have a tremendous respect for. And then in the middle, I have to find a way to present this in a way that does both, but in a way that doesn't necessarily, sacrifice one in order to get to the other. Believers, I'm sorry, I have to go back. I'll let you know why I did what I did tonight, asking questions to get people in the know. What you're doing on the live, and you have questions that, okay, so you don't feel offended. We have strong believers that don't even crack a joke. No, it's okay. I honestly don't feel offended. Okay, let me clarify. Sometimes when I get really passionate about a question that you ask, it seems like I'm triggered, but actually it triggers a passion, not necessarily offense. So, sometimes I'm actually waiting for someone to actually ask a question so I can pounce. But no, I'm not offended by all means. So if you ask a question, I'm actually very ready to answer a question. So by all means, I appreciate you. I'll let BMU know so you know. Good night. Get some rest. I appreciate it. I'll be in the live here very, very shortly. To that end, thank you. So to that end, I do wish to continue the conversation. And yes, part 4 is going to go into now the more historicity, not so much the background, but going into what happened as far as the Crusades and kind of the gory side of what happened, and the Spanish the Spanish Revolution, the type stuff, and some of these key figures and the popes and what they did, and then some of the Crusades and so on and so forth. We'll kind of get into some of that, and yes, what Titus did in Alexandria and so on and so forth. We're gonna try and get into that, okay? But I may also take a break on part 4 and get into a little bit of politics. We'll see. I'll keep you posted on what I do. You'll see it. But at any rate, I hope this has been informative. I hope this makes you think a little bit. And I hope this gives you a little bit of a taste, a little bit of a reason as to why I always have said since part 1 and into now part 3, and giving a little taste of what Mr. Bennett have said, which is to keep religion respectfully, unless we're having a theological conversation, which I am down for. I am down for a theological conversation. Hell, we can have a theological conversation about the 10 Commandments. I have one loaded in the clip right there. I just didn't play it tonight. But, why the 10 Commandments, is not necessarily the greatest thing ever created, and how it shouldn't necessarily be applied to, to legislation, but maybe kept in the churches. That type of thing. Keep it where it needs to be. Respectfully. All right. So, hope you've enjoyed tonight. Thank you all for coming out. I appreciate it. Make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Keep the comments going. Okay. All right. Get the message out and keep the algorithm going. And like I always tell everyone whenever I do these things, make sure you think a little bit deeper. Think objectively, and whatever you come up with, make sure you stand on that shit. All right. It's been a pleasure tonight. And good night, everybody. Salute to you. Thank you, guys.